Okay, we are streaming and just waiting for folks to populate the room.
Okay, thank you, Andy, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rob Champetti, Chairman of the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals. It being the appointed hour of 7 p.m., this is the meeting of August 10th, 2021. And as Andy Porter, our planning director, had mentioned, we usually just wait a moment or two to allow attendees to log on and get themselves acquainted with the platform on Zoom. And what I'll do is I'll take a moment in just a moment, and we'll get things started. I'll go through essentially the flow of the meeting this evening, the sequence of what we do and how we do business via Zoom with the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals. If you haven't attended a meeting online, I'll just walk everyone through exactly what we do. I will then go through the roll and call the roll of the Newburyport ZBA to establish a quorum, go through the voting, what's required to be successful on an application, and then we'll get right into the first matter in our agenda, which is a request for minor modification. Once we take care of that business, we'll get into the public hearings. And we do have one matter that we've received a continuance request on, so we'll take care of that first in case there are folks that are here this evening to participate in that hearing. They won't have to wait until the application comes up in the sequence on the agenda, only to then be told that it's going to be continued to another night. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and open up our meeting for the hearing night of August 10th, 2021. This is the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals, City of Newburyport, and it is just about 7:01, and it looks like we have folks all logged on or beginning to log on sufficiently. So allow me to begin. I will start by calling the roll. And if members of the ZBA, when I call your name, just respond either here or present. Mr. Mark Moore. Mark, can you hear us? Just want to unmute your mic.
The dreaded unmute problem. I am here.
Excellent. Mr. Stephen Delisle. Stephen, if you can unmute your mic as well. There you go. And Mr. Delisle, we see you're present. We just want to make sure you can hear us.
And I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can now. Okay.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you. And Mr. Ken Swanton.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Bud Shannon is absent, and I believe we have a note that Mr. Shannon will be possibly able to log on at about 8:30 this evening. I'll revisit that with respect to how it impacts our hearings in just a moment. Mr. Gregory Bennett.
I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. And Rob Champetti, I'm here. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 present. So we have 5 members of the ZBA present. We do have a quorum, and so we can continue with the business of the ZBA this evening. So before we jump into the request for minor modification, which we'll do in a moment on 2123 Walnut Street, I just want to take a moment and explain to everyone who perhaps hasn't been logged on before on a Zoom municipal hearing or ZBA in particular, exactly how we do business via Zoom. What we'll do when we commence with the public hearings, you will hear me first read the legal notice. Essentially, I'll begin by reading the legal notice by description, by property address, the docket number, as well as the applicant's name. We then just read it very briefly, a description of what the applicant seeks in terms of relief. So whether the applicant's seeking a special permit or special permit for non-conformities or variance, and the descriptor that was published in the newspaper and that's published on the agenda itself, so that anyone listening in can have a general sense of which application is about to be heard and what that applicant seeks the ZBA to vote on. After I read the public notice and we open that application, I then turn the floor over to the applicant or the applicant's representative to present the application. That application is presented by the applicant themselves or their attorney or architect or engineer or all of the above. And once they have completed the presentation, we will then close that portion of the public hearing and go to public comment. Public comment is when we will elicit from the audience, from you members of the community who are in attendance, to simply click your hand at the bottom right of the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll see a raise hand icon. If you click that, we'll see it, and Mr. Port, our planning director, will unmute your mic. We'll ask you to also go ahead and click unmute at the bottom left. It's a microphone icon. It should show up as green when it's unmuted. That means that we can hear you and you can hear us. We then just ask that you give your name and your address for our keeper of the minutes so that we can record who you are. And then all you need to do is just try to keep your comments under about 2 minutes, and feel free to speak as you wish. Don't feel as though you need to fall into a column of pro or con. If you do wish to make that notation, feel free, but don't feel compelled to. We don't put you in one column or the other. It's just simply speaking your mind. You may also pose questions in that portion of the public comment section, but understand that in the format, your questions will not be addressed in real time. Essentially, the members of the ZBA will be listening carefully to the public comments and formulating their own questions based on what they hear from the public comment section. So rest assured, your questions will be adapted and will be woven into questions from members of the ZBA, even though they won't be answered directly or addressed directly in that portion of the public hearing. Mr. Port will be putting up a slide that you can see, and it's just a reminder on the governance of how we do public comments. So we just ask you to kindly and respectfully govern yourselves accordingly. Try to keep your comments under 2 minutes. We do have some flexibility, but in order to keep everyone moving forward, we ask that everyone try to respect that time limit. Once we finish public comments, I then close that portion of the public hearing and we go to questions from the board. That's when we will go through the role of every member of the ZBA. And each member of the ZBA will pose questions to the applicant's representatives, and oftentimes you'll hear questions that will be a mirror of what may have been posed by members of the public. Could be that members of the public had raised a question that a ZBA member had themselves as well. So once questions have been completed, we will then close that portion of the public hearing and we go to deliberations. Deliberations in the public hearing format is essentially when members of the public and all those in attendance essentially get to hear the members of the ZBA think out loud and deliberate and toil over the legal criteria that must be met in order for an applicant to prevail and to be successful on an application. And we discuss and deliberate whether those criteria have been met. We may pose additional questions. We may find ourselves revisiting questions, in which case I, as the chair, will just use some limited discretion to allow the organic evolution of that, so that we can, in the spirit of getting to the best possible result, we can upturn all of the questions that might still be out there or posed as part of that deliberation. But deliberation is very strictly a discussion around the legal criteria and whether the applicant has met that criteria, and if so, how. And once we've completed deliberations, we then close that portion of the public hearing. And this is the portion of our public hearing, the final portion, when we go to a vote. Under an adapted version of Robert's Rules of Order, I will invite a motion to approve from a member of the ZBA, which then must be seconded. Keep in mind that you will hear a member make a motion to approve does not necessarily mean that that member intends to support or vote in favor of the application. It's merely procedurally how that matter is placed onto the floor for a vote, and it's in the affirmative. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a member is going to vote that way. It's just simply the format. So be prepared for that. A member will make a motion to approve in the affirmative, which will be then seconded. Once it's made and seconded, I, as the chair, will then call the roll and go through the roll call of all the members of the ZBA, who will respond either yay or nay on the vote on the application. It will be, an applicant will need at least 4 votes in the affirmative for the motion to carry and for the application to be approved. We have 5 voting members this evening, and we do have one application that will have only 4, which is a minimum board. I'll explain that in a minute. But essentially, that's what will happen. And if 4 members of the ZBA vote yes, that motion carries and that application is approved, and that request is granted. So with that, we will then go. I'm now going to go into the first matter on our agenda, which is a request for minor modification. It's 21-23 Walnut Street, and I believe this is a request being brought by the applicants by their counsel, Attorney Mead, Tellerman, and Costa. Attorney Mead, you wish to be heard.
Actually, this isn't, I'm not handling this matter. I'm handling a continuance, however.
Okay, it's, who, is there someone else?
Stephen Dodge is here this evening. I think the application form itself had indicated that Mead, Tellerman, and Costa would represent. So Stephen, are you there?
Oh, my
Yes.
apologies.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here to represent 21 Walnut Street.
Very good. Stephen, why don't you go ahead and you have the floor and just let us know what you're requesting and why.
Yeah, my request was most of the trim, the original trim, was in such disrepair. I need to replicate it all. And I think somebody, I don't know, sent something in to Jennifer Blanchet that I didn't do the right trim or whatever. And that was simply, nothing's finished there. I've sent out all the pieces I think in question to be replicated. And I'm just asking, I guess, permission to do what I was going to do. I've submitted a few photos of, I think it was questioned as to whether I threw away a bunch of the trim, which I didn't. I saved it in order to replicate it. I sent photos of that, and I also, the photos will show the condition it's in. It's pretty much irreparable. Everything, the front door, everything, when we purchased the property, the front door had been kicked in and just kind of pieced together. I mean, everything was just in total disrepair. And I think at one time that property had come before the Board of Health because neighbors were complaining about squirrels and raccoons and all kinds of varmints living in there. And they had eaten away a bunch of the fascia and soffit boards up around the roof area. You know, it's just that the place was a mess. And what I need to do is replicate these pieces because I cannot repair them. In the corner boards, I used Boral to replace what was there. It's pretty much straight stock. I stayed to the exact dimensions as to what was there. The front door, I have to replicate that, and I will do so with, you know, side lights and a transom. That door has been on order for a long time. I did not change the dimensions of the front door opening one iota. That's still original. I kept everything, you know, everything's dimensionally as it's supposed to be. I think, you know, right now it looks like nothing's, you know, everything's been done wrong, but actually nothing's been done at all. So that's I'm pretty much requesting permission to replicate all those pieces, and I will use Spanish cedar to replicate all that. So it'll be done in wood, and it'll be done, you know, they'll look, you'll never know the difference when I'm done. So I guess that's my case.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dodge. So we will just go to questions from the board. Let me begin with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Dodge, what you're saying is that what was seen was basically the interim steps that were going on while you were in the process of replicating, and were not meant to be a replacement of what was required from the original plans. It was just
Actually,
kind of a
nothing,
misunderstanding that it was a final, and it was just
yes, I believe that to be the case. They just saw the corners on there, and they're not even close to being put back together. It was pretty much to get the building tight so we could insulate it and, you know, proceed with construction.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with regard to the front door, could you just explain, you said, I think what I understood was that the side lights and the door, neither of those elements are something that can be reused and they will be replaced, but or replicated, but they will be, dimensions will be the same as what was existing. Is
That's correct.
that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And the style will be the same, where you'll have the two side lights on left and right and a transom above? the
Yes,
extent that that's what it was. I think that's what it was.
yes, and all the
Uh,
floated columns that you saw in the picture, those will be all replicated and put back in place. You know, I saved the
Right,
entire
okay.
storefront to make sure that, you know, we replicated it and it looks exactly like it was, you know, in 1850.
And that's what you said would be milled out of the Spanish cedar.
Yes, that and all some of the circled areas you'll see up around the capitals at the bottom of the roof line, those will all be replicated in Spanish cedar and put back. Yeah, all the details, it'll look like it's supposed to.
And just refresh my memory, are the corner boards on the corners of the original house, the original portion of the structure, are those fluted also, or are those flat with some sort of raised trim on those?
Yeah, no, they're not fluted. They were basically just picture framed in flat stock. And those look just like they were. Those had to be
Yeah, okay.
replaced. Those have been replaced.
Right, okay. And they're replaced because, as shown in the picture, they were some combination of rotted, so weathered that they would never hold paint, or something in between. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. They had satellite dishes hanging off them and bats living behind them and birds' nests, you name it, it was there.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dodge. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, thank you. You know, when it was discovered a couple weeks ago that the boards were taken off and other ones were being put up to replace them on the trim, a member of the Historical Commission took some pictures of what it looked like, and we haven't really seen any of those tonight. I was wondering, Andy, do you have one of those we could put up? Just because I think I have a question basically for the applicant. I don't know if, Andy, you have that.
What I have is what's posted on the website. I don't know if those were sent to the office.
Okay, I sent them to you this afternoon. They were sent to the zoning enforcement officer when she asked them to stop. But I did send them to you at 5 o'clock this afternoon because I was concerned that she did not forward them to you.
Okay, I'm sorry. What I do have from you, I see an email from you on, however, there's no attachments I see.
I
to it.
just forwarded her note with the pictures down below. They're not attached.
They are not, no, just.
All right, well, let me ask my question then. So
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're correct, actually. Let me just pull that up for you.
because this is how kind of the whole thing stopped. Because a member of the Historic Commission noticed that the project was not being carried out. Like this, you can see in this picture here, the door is kind of, as you mentioned, is out for being worked on, but the corner board to the right of it is made out of kind of stock lumber with kind of 3 boards. And is that what was originally there, or was it fluted lumber as was shown in some of the pictures of what you pulled off? I'm wondering what's going to go back up there is what I'm wondering. Is this what's going back up there, or is more the fluted style that we saw in the demolition photos that you sent us?
No, that's what you're looking at is an exact replica of what was there. They were not floated.
Okay, so the fluted ones are around
They
the
were just in the
doorway.
door surround.
I get it. All right. I was unsure because they were off the house. I was unsure what happened. So
Yeah,
basically,
no, in fact, if you look at that picture of the front door, you'll see some delineation and some smaller trim
Yep.
against the siding. That's the original dimension and footprint of the existing door.
so the door that's going to go back will have that fluted trim that you pulled off.
Yes, everything you saw in my pictures will be replicated and put back on.
Okay,
None of
and-
the dimensions changed one iota in that door opening.
And the corner board that I'm asking about is you think you've kind of replicated what was there?
Oh, yes, yep.
Okay.
Yep, that was part of the door frame itself, so there will only be one raised section on the outside. The door was integrated into that corner board.
You know, I think the thing that I'm a little disappointed that I haven't heard so far is just a little bit of a, gee, I'm sorry, you know, we said on our plans, we would just, we would not just replace everything. We would just repair as needed. And you know, you're you've been in this trade, I'm sure, for a while. You saw what the boards looked like in the beginning. They're all on the surface. It's not like they're underneath. I would think that, you would have known in the beginning. So I would hope you at least tonight be saying, gee, I'm sorry. I went right ahead and replaced everything. I should have come back and asked.
Yeah, well, I was going to apologize. And also I was going to mention that I spent 8+ years on the Historical Commission. And in the
Okay.
time that I served there, what I've done here was always acceptable and sometimes encouraged due to the condition of some of the trim work.
I get.
And I
get that.
apologize. I did overlook, what is it, number 7 on the special permit. And I should have come before it got this far. I apologize to Jennifer Blanchet. And that's why, I just want to make this right. I wasn't trying to get away with anything.
No, I hear that, and I appreciate your service for all those years on the Historic Commission. It's just that you said on the plan, we would simply, repair it as needed. And
And actually, not to throw Eileen under the bus, but she wrote that in, and honestly, I didn't pay much attention to it. I'll be honest with you.
I see. Well, you
I've
are
been doing this
responsible.
for 45 years, and a lot of boards on the exterior of these homes have, they have a lifespan, and these boards are at the end of their lifespan, basically due to neglect.
I hear you, but you got to realize when we sit on the boards that we sit on in our position, we got a lot of people looking at all these photos saying, I could have repaired that. I could have restored that board. There's a lot of boards like that on houses all over Newburyport that haven't been ripped off. So that's what we're dealing with. But anyway, I appreciate what you're trying to do to make it as close as it was to where it was. And I hope you do a great job on the doorway. And that's basically what you're proposing to do in your plan. So I really don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Swanton and Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I really don't have much to add. I would simply say that, as my colleagues have emphasized, a regulatory program like the zoning ordinance and the obligations and duties of our zoning board of appeals depends in large measure on the good faith of the regulated community. And by that, the regulated community is those who come before us. And when we are faced with a situation where the zoning administrator and enforcement officer advises of a potential violation, it's somewhat of an order of ours. It's somewhat troubling, particularly since we don't have any power here at the zoning board of review to engage in any appropriate sanction if it were ever necessary. Putting that aside, I appreciate, Mr. Dodge, your efforts to improve this structure and your commitments to the community otherwise. But I would share Mr. Shagnan's concerns that it puts us in an uncomfortable situation where we have what is presented to us as a potential violation of a pretty clear directive. So I guess enough said. I know you're going to move forward in good faith, and I'll assume that you will.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I don't have any additional questions that haven't already been addressed. So we will close that portion of this public hearing on the minor modification request and go to deliberations by the board. Mr. Moore, you want to kick things off, or is there anything you want to add to? We kind of slipped a little bit into deliberations during questions, but that's fine.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, everything's been said. It is what has to happen if something that the board's agreed on is looking to be stretched in a different direction, and that's why the whole system fits together. So, what's before us is just a minor modification to what was there, and it's also a collective look in to see where the process is right now. So, given the good faith effort to mea culpa and to get back to where the agreement was, last October, as far as the fascia boards and the styling of the corner boards, then I think I could look at this as a minor modification, but again, with a very specific language and how we do it.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle, anything you wish to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I too can consider this a minor modification, and I would join in with Mr. Swanton and Mr. Bennett in, noting firstly that certainly when we deal with these older structures and structures that have been left without loving care for some time, there are certainly circumstances where things cannot be reused, despite the fact that we might love for that to occur. It's clear that the life of a board is only so long, and if it's not whether covered and painted properly, that lifespan dramatically decreases. So certainly we can understand Mr. Dodge's situation here. I think that what we need, as Mr. Bennett and Mr. Swanton indicated, is that this is something that you need to come to the board first. I think that's sort of the bottom line on that. So that being said, I can I guess support this as a minor modification.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton, anything you wish to add?
Yeah, no, I was actually thinking about opposing this because I think there should be some penalty to just stripping all the trim off when you say in your plan that you're not going to do that. They should have come back and asked. I got to tell you, when you started talking about replicating the doorway and doing the fluted boards and using Spanish cedar and doing it right, you kind of got me back. And I guess I'll agree with my colleagues, but I just think I worry about Newburyport that there's no penalty for not doing what's in your plans. Because this was a toughie for me in the beginning when we approved this thing. We put on an oval window on the side of it that's just, quite frankly, is totally out of keeping with this era of house and all these other things that we compromised on. And they have this. It's just annoying, but I'm not going to make a case out of it, and I will reluctantly support this minor modification.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanton. And Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I can support the request for a minor modification. I agree with Mr. Swanton. As I indicated, we do not have any authority to impose any sanction. The sanction arises only if the order is disobeyed and then enforced in court. I think I would suggest that is an issue that perhaps we can urge the city council to address. And also I would compliment Ms. Blanchett for reporting this in a clear and concise way so that it's before the Zoning Board of Appeals tonight. Aside from that, I can approve this.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. And I too, I share the sentiment of what appears to be my colleagues' unity on this point. I think the process has worked, and it worked, in an expedited way. We were alerted to this. We had the opportunity to vet it. We certainly had the opportunity to hear directly from the applicant. Mr. Dodge explained himself and whether, it obviously leaves something to be desired and what our preference all would have been. It does resonate with me as well. And I think my colleagues had mentioned it. They shared this sentiment that, things don't last forever. There are finite lifespans, and we must respect that things, just as we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so at some point we have to concede that something's reached the end of its useful life or the end of its, its expected life. And I think care and repair and maintenance can only shorten that. Hanging satellite dishes and other drill holes into this is only going to further weaken the integrity of it. So it's an unfortunate loss of an architectural element, but I do think that I am moved by the fact that it is being replaced with natural materials in a architectural respectful style, in the absence of being able to preserve it and have prevented it from its condition. I think that it's a responsible way to proceed. So I too am moved around to being able to support it, like my colleagues. Okay, so with that, do we have a motion?
This is Mr. Bennett. I will move to approve the request for minor modification application 2020-071 and 2020-070 for 21-23 Water Street.
And Mr. Bennett, if I can just suggest that you feather into that motion and that you find it to be a minor modification as well.
Yes, and I'll further add that based upon the record, the application before us satisfies the requirements for a minor modification.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Do we have a second?
This is Mr. Delisle. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Motion's made by Mr. Bennett and seconded by Mr. Delisle. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
A reluctant yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes,
and Rob Chiappetti. I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the minor modification is approved. And thank you very much, Mr. Dodge, for your presentation. And please heed the advice of the members, as you've heard it this evening, with respect to paying close attention to the details of the permit. We look forward to a very a very thoughtful result.
And I'll deliver that to you. Thank you very much.
Take care, sir. Thank you. Okay, so having concluded that portion of the business part of the meeting, we can now go into our public hearings. We do have one matter that we've received a request by the applicant's attorney to continue. This is the matter of 276 High Street, docket 2021-48, a special permit to remove later additions on an accessory barn and to move that barn to a different location on the lot. We've received, the planning office has received a request by Attorney Mead, Talman and Costa, on behalf of Christopher and Holly Ragosa, trustees, to continue the matter for further refinement on their end until the hearing of September 14th. Attorney Mead, do you wish to be heard on the request, or shall we just proceed on the request for continuance?
You can proceed as you have stated, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. Okay, members of the ZBA, do we have a motion to continue on the applicant's request? A motion to continue 276 High Street to the hearing date of 9/14.
So moved, Ken Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton.
Seconded, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Motion's made by Mr. Swanton, seconded by Mr. Moore. Calling the roll on the motion to continue 276 High Street to September 14th. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
I'm going to recuse myself on this matter, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
yes,
And Rob Chiappetti, I vote yes. That's 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the matter is continued to the hearing of September 14th. Thank you, Attorney Mead, and members of the ZBA. So anyone who is here to speak in connection with that application, just kindly note this matter will be heard and will be placed on the agenda for September 14th. So this way it's at the end of our agenda this evening. We didn't want members of the public to just be sitting around waiting to hear a continuance. So we tried to do that as a courtesy to everyone. Jumping back to the top of our agenda, the public hearings, we have the application of 2 Neptune Street, Patty Ann Bampos. This is docket 2021-26, a special permit for non-conformities to add a dormer on the rear roof of a pre-existing non-conforming structure. This matter was continued to this evening from the hearing date of July 27th, 2021. And before we begin, I just wish to ask the applicant, Ms. Bampos, we have one member that is not able to log on this evening until possibly 8:30, if at all. We expect it's 8:30, but it could be a different time, and it could be not at all. I'm not qualified to, I haven't been qualified to vote on this matter, so that leaves you with a minimum board to proceed now, that means that only 4 members would be voting if you wanted to proceed in sequence, or we could, with your permission, we could move this to the end of our agenda this evening and allow for the possibility of a 5th voting member, which would be Mr. Bud Shannon, to be able to log on, giving you 5 voting members instead of a minimum 4-member board. And as I mentioned in the beginning this evening, 4-member board means that all members would have to vote yes for your application to be successful. So with that, I always want to extend the courtesy to applicants, how they wish to proceed. And Ms. Bampos, do you have a preference on how you wish to proceed?
I would like to be at the back of the pack tonight. I would like to wait and see if your 5th member does join the meeting.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Bampos.
Yeah, and if they do not, then I guess I would ask for a continuance.
Very good. Okay, and we can address it then. I will be stepping from the chair to allow Mr. Moore to step up to chair your application. So that will happen after the application of 8 Coffin Court. So you're really only going to be behind 2 applications, and we'll go ahead and do that with your permission. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So that brings us to the application of Alexander and Mary Bruce Ray Grant, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. The application address is 20 Atwood Street. There are 2 matters before us this evening. Pardon me. One is a docket 2021-37, a dimensional variance to demolish 2 existing detached accessory sheds and construct a new shed and 2 small 1-story additions to the house, increasing the lot coverage in excess of 25%. And the second application for relief before us this evening is docket 2021-38. That is a special permit for nonconformities. The applicant is seeking permission to construct two additions to the pre-existing non-conforming single-family house, resulting in an extension of the rear yard setback, and to construct a new shed extending the side yard setback, which is a non-conformity. So there's 2 matters before us. This application was also continued to this evening from the hearing date of July 27th, 2021. With that, Attorney Mead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I could just for an administrative matter, you had not previously qualified yourself on this application. Are you qualified this evening to vote on this application? So I have 5 members.
My apologies. Thank you, Attorney Mead. I qualified myself, so this would give you 5 voting members, the 5 voting members being myself, Mr. Moore, Mr. Delisle, Mr. Swanton, and Mr. Bennick.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you, members of the board. As the board knows, we appeared at a prior meeting of the board to initially discuss our application in early July, late June. And the board had some concerns or questions over the variance and the size of the additions in relation to the lot coverage request. To that end, after that meeting, the applicant went back and worked with David Curie to revise the plans, which is what we have before you. So this evening, for the record, I'm representing Alexander and Mary Bruce Ray Grant, the owners of 20 Atwood Street, who are the applicants. My name is Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa 30 Green Street. And with me this evening is David Curie as well, who is the architect on the project. What we'll show you in a moment are the new revised plans. You'll note on the proposed lot coverage that it has been reduced from our original request of 30.2% to 28.9%. As I'm going to point out to you shortly, it is interesting to note that the R3 district, which this used to be, which is only a block away, has a 30% lot coverage requirement in the dimensional table. The R2 district, which this is now a part, has a 25% lot coverage dimensional requirement. The applicant achieved this by reducing the size of the proposed shed from 8 by 14 to 7 by 9 feet 4 inches, or from 112 square feet to 65 square feet. You'll note there is no other outdoor storage place on this property. There's no garage. There's currently 2 sheds that are very small and falling apart. And this one shed would replace those 2 sheds. This was also accomplished by a reduction in the addition on the front of the property, the entryway, from 14 feet by 8 feet 5.5 inches to 13.5 feet by 7 feet 9.5 inches, or from 112 square feet to 99 square feet. As the board is aware, we are talking about very small numbers here, given the size of the lot and the structure that exists thereupon. Both of these structures provide significant needed function to the property, and so every inch counts, not unlike most other properties in the South End. The proposed modifications are quite modest, but result in a significant improvement to the first floor living space for the applicants and the much needed exterior storage space. The proposed additions are sensitive to the size and scale of the home, as well as the architectural detail. The property, as I noted, is just over a block away from the R3, which allows a 30% lot coverage and which actually exists in most areas in the district. Importantly, the applicants have also received, as I've said before, letters of support from all of their abutters, several at the last meeting who spoke on behalf of them at the prior meeting. Also, the applicant has received another letter of support from their most immediate abutter to the right as you look at the property that was submitted prior to this evening, who actually likes the changes better than what was originally supported that they supported. That would be the Prestons. And this evening, Mr. Coulter-John, who owns the property, he and his wife own the property to the left, was going to be here and speak on behalf of the applicant, but at 6:23, the applicant received an email from Mr. Coulter-John saying due to an unexpected situation, he won't be able to attend the ZBA as a meeting, but to remind the board that they have his letter of support from before. So as the board is aware, it's important for the historic character and vibrancy of this city to have individuals who purchase historic homes to invest in them so they remain used and lived in within our community. As times change, so do the needs and acceptable living arrangements and uses of our historic structures. Indeed, a mere review of the historic maps of Newburyport show how historic structures have changed over time to meet the needs of its residents. A little addition here or there, a change here or there. The need indeed is a development in the very fabric of our historic community. To that end, Alexandra and Mary Bruce are proposing modest improvements to this structure. In the meantime, they are updating it and making slight adjustments to meet the needs of 21st century living. With that, if you could go to the next slide, please, Andy. On this site plan, you'll see where the proposed additions are. Again, in the front, we have the smaller proposed entryway on the top of this slide towards Atwood Street. We have the newly proposed shed, which is also smaller and further away from the sideline. And then we have the rear proposed addition that fills in that back corner. Both of those additions, of course, are one-story additions. If you go to the next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Keary to present the actual architectural methodology used in achieving these modifications. David?
Thank you, Lisa. David Keary, Keary Designer, representing Mary Bruce and Alex Ray Grant. Just to follow up with what Lisa said, yes, we've primarily reduced the overall footprint by reducing the shed quite a bit. And as you can see, the existing sheds primarily house trash, as on the upper left-hand corner, you can see is basically just a trash shed. And the front, I believe, has a few bikes and miscellaneous things. I can hear somebody else in the background.
Yeah, there's some background noise.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay,
David.
just making sure. So as you can see, what we've done is we've constructed a new smaller shed, taller, to allow perhaps them to hang bikes in the new structure and still use the first the floor for lawnmower, etc. And mudroom has been reduced in size slightly to also help with the square footage. The overall design of the mudroom kitchen look fairly much the same as they did last time, the mudroom being a little smaller and the shed pretty drastically reduced in terms of its footprint to get the numbers down as low as we could. You could look at the next slide, please. And again, this is just a view. On the left side is the front edition of mudroom. Again, a little smaller. It looks close to what was there before. On the rear, we did not change the kitchen bump out. And then to the left of that just shows the length of that shed quite a bit smaller. That shed is actually, placed in the dotted, as you can see in the dotted line of the right-hand drawing. That's where that shed will be placed if it was in front. Please, the next slide, please. No change at all to this side. As you may recall, the Ray Grants are improving the house by adding new divided light windows. They're also removing an ugly concrete block chimney off the rear. These are improvements they'd like to make to the house in making it their own. And the model is in the next 4 slides. We'll just go through that quickly. Again, this is the taller shed structure from the rear. And the next, please. And the shed structure from the front and the smaller mudroom. This was the prior, a longer shed structure. And from the front, the same thing was the prior. I believe that is it. In plan, we have, that's the view of the shed, the mudroom with laundry, and the kitchen. And you can see there's foundation in the front and sauna tube foundation for the rear addition and the shed. Just a statement from me is about the progress of this, that the house was built, as Lisa mentioned, what was formerly the R3 district, and the Ray Grants have a 24.3% lot coverage. So what we started out with was, if they had a 6x6 additional shed on the property to begin with, or 36 square feet more lot coverage, they would actually just be existing non-conforming, and they'd need a special permit for this project, obviously just to show that what was proposed was substantially not more detrimental than what exists. This was the case for another client of mine a few years ago who had an existing lot coverage of 25.3%. In the case of that project in the north end, they were able to build a new 8-foot by 8-foot mudroom and a 12 by 24-foot garage and increase their lot coverage in that case to 33%, all under the special permit for non-conformities criteria. There were no objections to that project, and it fit well on the site and was designed to architecturally complement the existing home, and the clients live there happily today. I think the job of the ZBA member is not an easy one. Applicants come before the board with hopes of approval, and that's not always easy to give for many reasons. I've appeared before this board many times in the past 20 years, and in my experience, members have historically relied not just on their own opinions of a project, but on the opinions of abutters and the general public, and I think that's altogether reasonable. I think it's also reasonable in the case of a variance to look beyond the written letter of the law, since the written letter of the law cannot judge the individual merits of a project. If the board's tied solely to that letter of the law, then why have a board at all? The issue of a variance becomes a non-issue, and there's no need to deliberate the merits of one design over another. This particular project has had overwhelming support from all the neighbors and was commended in the last meeting by this board for its design and presentation. Those who keep a careful watch on historic homes were happy to see that the additions proposed to this home were tastefully added to the rear of the property and did not in any way alter the main historic federal style structure. The owners will actually be improving the main structure, as we talked about before, by adding the individual light windows and removing that ugly chimney. They're old house lovers, and they will keep and improve the historic charm of this home. So is it fair that a homeowner I represented in 2018 can cover his 33% of his lot solely because that homeowner is lucky enough to have had an existing lot coverage slightly over the 25% threshold, while the Ray grants in what is arguably a more dense area than the north end are held to under 25%. In assessing whether it's fair to grant relief here, my hope is that the board will consider the relatively minimal relief we're seeking and see that the Ray grants have taken great care to add a tasteful addition that will improve this historic home. And it's fair to grant relief based on the merits and the overwhelming support for the project.
Thank you, David. So with that, I will go into the requirements of the ordinance. I don't think I need to reiterate the special permit criteria which we resolved or went through last time. Again, there are no new nonconformities here. There is an extension of the rear yard nonconformity and a slight intensification, similarly with the shed. And that is given because of the odd shape of the lot. That rear lot line comes at an angle towards the house, while the house itself sits square on the street. And of course, the lot is square on the street. So with an angled rear lot line, that extension becomes an exacerbation. But that's already a nonconformity, and so a new nonconformity is not created. And as we previously stated, also, certainly the proposed additions are not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood for all of the reasons that were stated prior, and for what David has stated, and for what I will state in a moment related to the variance. The next thing is that we do have a hardship related to the shape of the lot and the fact that we are working with minimizing any impacts on the historic structure. And so with that, we believe that the hardship is related to the historic structure and making it improved and more useful to current living conditions, and also the shape of the lot. The proposal does not derogate at all from the intent and purpose of the ordinance, as the additional lot coverage, given the nature of the addition and shed, will help maintain the property values. The ability to provide functional living space while maintaining the historic integrity of the structure is in line with the purpose and intent of the ordinance. You heard that reiterated by Mr. Coulter-John, who owns the property to the left or east of this property. Further, the proposed change will not be more detrimental to the neighborhood, as there is no negative impacts on the neighbors as a result of the granting of the variance. The closest structure to the shed, that neighbor actually has provided a letter of support that say they like this application better than the prior, and they fully support these changes. It's entirely consistent with the densely built south end. Both the neighbor and the applicant will continue to be able to access the sides of their buildings and continue to live as they have before. There's no special privilege that will be granted to the applicants either, as the proposal is entirely consistent with surrounding properties, which are all similarly densely situated on their lots. Andy, if you could go to slide 13, please. So as you can see, this property is across from Atwood Park. It's on Atwood Street, which is a very dense section of town. As I noted earlier, if this were a block away in the R3 district, it would be within the 30% required lot coverage, but it is now an R2 with 25% lot coverage. None of these houses can change what they have because the zoning changed. They are all continuing to be in one of the most densely packed areas of the city. The proposed modifications are minor modifications, but entirely consistent with the density that exists in this neighborhood as it stands. And so with that, we believe the board can find that the proposed addition is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, and a special permit for nonconformity should be granted, and that the appropriate criteria for the variance is met, and a special privilege will not be granted to the Ray grants for their proposed addition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. So we will close that portion of the public hearing, the presentation portion, and go to public comment. And Andy, if you could put up the public comment slide for me. And anyone who wishes to speak in connection with the application, either for, against, or just simply speak, just kindly click the raise hand button. We will recognize you and unmute your mic and invite you to be heard. Looking, seeing no hands yet.
And Mr. Ciampetti, the chair, I will also add that for those, we have one caller, it looks like. For those calling, anybody who's interested in raising their hand, you can press *9 to do so.
Thank you, Andy. That's right, *9. Still seeing no hands going once, going twice. And if we see a late hand, I usually offer the courtesy of circling back so that we can certainly hear everything that wishes to be said by any members of the public. Still seeing no hands, I will close that portion of the public hearing and go to questions from the board, beginning with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. Attorney Mee, could you go back to the point you made with the lot line closest to the shed?
Sure.
And I think you said, just looking at the last, I think one of the last things that we saw, the picture from above, showing the lot lines. The lot lines to me looked parallel, but I know that's not perfect. Could you just go over again how they're not?
Sure. So if you look at the rear lot line, obviously the rear lot line is at an angle as compared to the front lot line. The easterly lot line is longer than the westerly lot line. And the westerly lot line is at a slight angle. So the shed is proposed to be square with the house, and the house is square with the street. So you can see how there's a 2-foot setback at the front of the shed,
right,
and a 2-foot 2-ish setback at the rear of the shed. So that line is on an angle, as is the rear lot line, as compared to the square, line at the street, and how the house is square to the street.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think the biggest issue, well, I didn't have a huge issue with the original proposal. Just given a lot of factors, including we'll get into that in deliberation. So I'm going to relinquish my questions to my colleagues. So I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Mead, could you reiterate what the hardship is here?
So I think there are two hardships, Mr. Delisle. Their hardship is the shape of the lot and the fact that there's a historic structure on the lot that we don't want to demolish any part of. We don't want to add second floor additions to it, to any proposed additions, so as to cover up any part of the historic structure. And in order to make that historic structure more useful for 21st century living, we're proposing two very modest additions. And so in order to allow the historic structure to continue to be functional for many, many years and to receive improvements, they're really the best way to do that. And the only way, because of its existence on the lot where it is and the size that it is and the lot shape, the proposed additions are designed and put in a place and of a size that would cause it to go over lot coverage because of the location, size of the existing historic structure and the shape of the lot.
Well, but does lot coverage really relate to the shape of the lot? Because lot coverage doesn't matter if it's a square, a rectangle, a circle. It's just an area. So that's why I'm having some difficulty with that. Lot coverage really doesn't really relate at all to the shape of the lot. Lot coverage is lot coverage regardless of shape.
Right, but it's the relationship in this particular instance of the historic structure on this lot and the size of the historic structure. And so I think it's a whole combination. I don't think if you can just look at one over the other. And if part of the building were to be taken down, if the applicant were to do several stories of an addition, it could potentially reduce the lot coverage on it. But because of the historic structure, it shouldn't happen because of the historic structure. So hence the overage on lot coverage.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. And Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, thanks. I haven't actually been counting them up, but if I was, I think I would have heard the word historic or historic structure maybe 40 or 50 times by now. And I guess my first question is, this is not a demolition control overlay district where we're supposed to consider how historic the building is. This is a variance and a special permit. And, one of my colleagues pointed out a few meetings ago, we're not supposed to think about historic. That's not part of our charter. So I guess, why do you keep mentioning it's historic?
Because the structure itself is part of the hardship. So under 40A, section 10, due to the shape of the lot, hang on a minute, I'll get the exact language. The shape, topography, soil condition of such land or structures, and especially affecting such land or structures. So, with all due respect, Mr. Swanton, this is a historic structure. It is in a historic area of town. And there are many times that this board considers the historic nature of the structures when it's making determinations about additions that are being applied to them. And so I don't think that we can throw away the fact that that's what this is. And 40A section 10 actually talks about structures. And I could just call it a structure if you'd like, but I think everybody around this area would appreciate the fact that it's identified exactly what it is. If we came in and proposed an addition that was 2 stories that covered up a portion of the structure, this board itself, I guess, and many of the abutters would talk about the historic structure being covered up. So if one can use the argument that it's a historic structure and we should try to preserve the evidence of that, then in both ways, that argument works and is appropriate, quite frankly, in this instance and many other instances in town.
Actually, I like your answer, and I think we should be thinking about that more, particularly in the South End. Usually it helps with a variance to have a topography issue, a soil condition issue, or a lot shape issue. And you've mentioned lot shape a few times. The South End's got a lot of funky lot shapes, and this one is probably more close to a rectangle than most of the lots in the South End. Is it not?
Well, I would disagree with you. I don't have most of the lots in the South End. We're talking about the lots in this neighborhood. This has a one side line that's shorter than the other and the rear lot line that's at an angle. So it's not a square lot. It's not a rectangle. I'm not a mathematician, but it's not either of those things. It's something else. And because of the way the house is square to Atwood Street, there's an angle in that lot in the back, and you can see it from the dimensions that are on the plan.
Having said everything I just said, I think somebody could challenge that this lot is not that irregular, the soil conditions and the topography are not that irregular. But at the end of the day, I don't really think I care. Because it would be a problem if somebody wanted to fight this who had standing, somebody who was an abutter, and we know all the abutters like this, at least all the ones we've heard from, or if the city thought it was a problem. And I think it's a nice historic building in a nice neighborhood. I like what they're doing with the plan. I like the 6/6 windows they're putting in. I think they're making a nice improvement. I realize that if somebody fought this, they might question whether there's really a hardship here. But at the end of the day, I don't particularly care. I think we on the zoning board have to figure out whether this is okay or not. And I don't have any other questions. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Swanton. And I see that we have Bud Shannon logged on. Bud, were you here for the entirety of this presentation?
I was not. I've only been on about 10 minutes. So
We'll include you in the deliberations and the board piece of the next application, but I just thought I would ask before we passed you by. But thank you for logging on this evening. Moving to Mr. Bennett.
I don't have any questions. The presentation was comprehensive and quite instructive, actually. I will say, obviously, that any decision here, I mean, putting aside the strict language of the ordinance that we are governed by, of course, we must be guided by our own administrative discretion, which is why we're sitting here. So I just will try when we get to that point to balance my obligations with respect to the ordinance requirements and the discretion that the members of the Zoning Board of Appeals are vested with.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I don't have anything to share in questions. I think my colleagues have outlined some more topical concerns that I would have had, and I believe they've been vetted. So we can go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing, and we will go to deliberations. And again, we're deliberating around the legal criteria, the permitting criteria for both the dimensional variance as well as for the special permit for non-conformities. So I just ask members of the ZBA to tailor your deliberations around your best grasp of whether you feel the presentation has met the legal criteria for both. And we'll start with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first time that we heard this, the variance hurdle, as it should, became a big issue. And despite great support from, or not despite, but there was great support from the neighborhood, from direct abutters, from the Historical Trust, who's also a neighbor. And that was all great to hear, but the hardship issue kept coming up with respect to variance. And I didn't want to get stuck on that because I thought, when you look at the property, you see that the owners have been great caretakers of the property. It's a wonderful looking house. They're making improvements. What was being proposed is modest, and to kind of just try to make this home, this historical home, just a little better, just a little more in fitting with, as I think Attorney Mead said, with the needs of today. But if you move on a little bit to the other section of our job as a board and looking at variance criteria, I can see a way that this would work. I mean, I do think conditions and circumstances are unique, not so much with the lot or the topography, which is also an issue that comes up, but the building can be unique. And I think that box built off the back and into the side area, it's a logical place to look to improve, but it's also kind of puts the owner in a bind on where they can make some changes that make sense without getting too egregious overrunning lot coverage. So I do think the building has unique conditions that justify this. And then if you looked at strict application of the chapter, I do think it's reasonable to add a small mudroom in that area and want to have a little better kitchen access than what currently exists, from what I recall from the plans or what I've seen in the plan. So I think that is very appropriate, and I think it would deprive the owner of reasonable use. So I see those two top bullets, met from what I've seen in this proposal. The fact that bump out box, it's not the result of anything the owners have done since the chapter was adopted, and I don't think I don't see any special privilege here. I just see a reasonable proposal, something that has been worked out in concert with the board and some of the issues that we had relayed in the prior meeting, and tried to kind of work this into something that makes sense. And I just think it makes sense. I think the house is in great shape. It's looking to be in better shape, has full support of everyone. Again, it's good to hear. It's not the end all be all, but it also would go to leaning towards more detrimental to the neighborhood. And I don't see how one could come to that conclusion either. So just a long-winded way of saying I can support this.
Okay, sorry about that delay. I didn't unmute my mic. All right, Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm still having some trouble on the variance piece. I'm not able to find that I see that all four of the variance criteria are met. I see the hardship as being the lot coverage, not the shape or the location of, not the shape of the lot or the location of the structure. I see it as lot coverage. The lot is too small for what is proposed. And I feel like with respect to some of the argument that has been made by the applicant and the applicant's architect, that those sorts of statements that, you know, another lot could get something more because they were already pre-existing non-conforming for lot coverage is sort of asking again for that fourth prong, the grant of a special privilege. So I'm having problems on the variance piece. With respect to the special permit, I have no problems there. I don't think that there's any new nonconformity or anything created here that would be more detrimental to the neighborhood. I'm afraid that I'm just stuck in a legal conundrum here.
Okay, was there anything further, Mr. Delisle?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, this is sort of a challenging one. I agree that the variance criteria don't feel really good for me. In that usually I'd be looking for a stranger shaped lot, you know, a corner lot, a lot of topography going on or bad soil or whatnot. Don't have any of those here. On the other hand, if they were proposing to plop a garage right on their lot line on the right side there, just right on the line, I would have a hard time with that variance. But what they're doing is replacing a shed near its lot line, and the real variance is around the coverage. And they are proposing to put two small things on the first floor rather than having them stacked on top of each other, which would solve their coverage issue. And they're basically been arguing that, well, it's an historic house and the historic nature of the neighborhood and everything. I think that's a refreshing argument. I think in the South End, it'd be lovely to talk about historic as a reason. I just haven't heard our city solicitor back that up. But I wish it was in the zoning act that we're having to rule on here so we could do it. On the other hand, you know, when you've had a grant of variance with kind of a shaky reason, a shaky hardship, it could be challenged by someone withstanding, like an abutter or like the city. But the abutters support this. And we are representing the city here. And I actually think what they're doing isn't bad, given all their constraints. So, you know, I don't usually do this, which is to support a variance. Well, I guess I did it on Brine, but I don't usually support a variance where there's not a clear lot issue. But in this case, I think I would. And I'm considering also the fact that this plan has improved from the last time they were here. And all the abutters support it. So I can support this, although I understand some of my colleagues' reluctance around the hardship issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. And moving on then to Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize Mr. Delisle's conundrum. It's been well stated by my other colleagues. In my view, I guess I try to apply a more holistic view of what's before us. And I guess the two components of my holistic analysis must start, of course, with the ordinance, which we are bound to apply, and then be augmented one way or another, or no way at all, based upon how the project strikes me, how it strikes me in terms of how I might exercise the discretion that I and all of us have in weighing these decisions. So when I look at this one, from that holistic perspective, I conclude that, one, this is a thoughtful design. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's an improvement to the home and to the neighborhood. So that is a positive, and it is a benefit to the city. It also is supported by the abutters, which is a major factor, particularly when we are considering a variance, which I agree we should be very thoughtful and deliberate in issuing that kind of relief. Nevertheless, on the discretionary side and how it kind of strikes me, it checks all the boxes. Then I go to the statutory requirements, and I do find that all the requirements, the four requirements for issuance of a variance, have been met here. And the most challenging one, of course, is whether or not there's a special circumstance here. And I am persuaded by the lot line presentation, and actually augmented by the observation by Mr. Moore regarding the structure of the building itself and the shed, and how the shed fits in. So for all of those reasons, I can support the issuance of the variance and also the special permit for non-conformities.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. And I too, and this is Rob Champetti, I share the sentiments of what appears to be most, if not all, of my colleagues with respect to both applications, which I too can support. I'm also moved by the improvement of the application from last time to this time, though I hadn't voted on it last time. I've since qualified myself and availed myself of what it was and now what it is before us this evening. And most telling in any variance, or really any application for relief, there's a lot of persuasive input that comes from the immediate abutters, the neighbors in particular. And it's not dispositive. It isn't, an end all be all, but it is very, very powerful to hear from those most impacted. And so we take it with a great deal of respect and relevance when we hear that. In this instance, we had only support from the most impacted abutters, and as we saw in the public comment section, we had no one from the immediate neighborhood, any of the abutters or otherwise from the community voice in opposition, which is very telling. So for all of those reasons and the reasons stated by my colleagues, I too find that the four criteria elements for a variance have been sufficiently addressed and met by the applicant, as well as the criteria elements for the special permit for non-conformities, and I too can support it. So with that, we can close that portion of the public hearing, the deliberations portion, and I will invite a motion from a member of the ZBA to approve.
So Mr. Morrow, make a motion to approve of the variance application for 20 Atwood Street. That's application 2021-37.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. And do we have a second?
Bennett, I'll second that.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Motion's made by Mr. Moore, seconded by Mr. Bennett on the application 2021-37 dimensional variance. Calling the roll. Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
no,
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes,
and Rob Champetti. I vote yes. That is 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the variance is approved. Do we have a motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities?
I'll move to approve the special permit for nonconformities application for 20 Atwood Street. That's 2021-38. This is Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
second by Mr. Bennett.
And motion's made by Mr. Moore, seconded by Mr. Bennett, calling the roll on the vote on the special permit for nonconformities. Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
yes,
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes,
Rob Champetti. I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the special permit for nonconformities is also approved. And congratulations to the applicant and thank you to everyone who spoke and offered information, and to Attorney Mead. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the board's consideration.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on now to the next application. This is the application of Cheryl Smith, trustee, care of Attorney Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC, 8 Coffins Court. This is a 3-part application. There are 3 separate applications for this applicant. 2021-45 is a dimensional variance to construct an in-law addition and a new 1-story addition on the rear, resulting in an increase of lot coverage and open space relief required. The second prong of this application is a special permit for nonconformities, docket 046. Construct an in-law addition and new 1-story addition on the rear of a pre-existing non-conforming home. And finally, the final piece of this is the actual special permit itself, docket 47, to allow an in-law apartment use. May we hear from the applicant, Attorney Mead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman, Costa, 30 Green Street. And with me this evening is Cheryl Smith, who has lived in this property for 45 years. She is the trustee and owner of the property, and her daughter, Rachel Mullen, who grew up in this property, and she and her husband and 2 children have moved back and living temporarily to Newburyport in the hopes to having a intergenerational living arrangement with one another at this house. So this, as the chair has said, is a request for a variance, a request for special permit for an in-law, and a request for special permit for nonconformities. So you can go to the next slide. So the property is located in the High Street Residential District and the DCOD districts in the city. The DCOD is not triggered in this application. And I might add, I apologize, Bill Stupkoff, who is the architect on this project, is also here with me. One of the reasons it's not triggered is Bill has been very careful about the design of this addition in relationship to the existing historic structure. It is currently used as a single-family residence, and the structure is listed as contributory on the district data sheets. It's located at 8 Coffins Court. For those of you who don't know where 8 Coffins Court is, it's actually the last little street on the right if you're traveling south on High Street, right before you get to Marches Hill, where there is a lot of topography. The Cheryl and Rachel, as I say, propose to construct an addition which will be used as an in-law apartment for Mrs. Smith, who is Cheryl. And additionally, they propose to do a small addition on the rear corner of the structure to provide enhanced living space for the new family who will be living in the main part of the structure. So first, I'm going to address the special permit for nonconformities. The property is located, as I said, in the HSRA zoning district and is pre-existing nonconforming for lot area, frontage, front setback, rear setback, and right side setback. And they are as follows. HSRA district requires 100 feet of frontage and a minimum area of 60,000 square feet. The property has 92.83 feet of frontage and an area of approximately 21,765 square feet. The front setback for the HSRA requires 75 feet, and the property has 49.6 feet. HRSA requires a rear setback of 300 feet and the property has 3.4. And finally, the HSRA requires a side setback of 25 feet and the property has a side setback of 4.7. Under the proposed project, the front setback, let me go to the next slide, I think, Andy. The front setback, which is required to be at 75 feet and has an existing 49.6, will be exacerbated by the addition of the in-law, and it will be at 31.2 feet. So that requires a special permit. The non-conforming rear setback will be extended along the rear. While it will not be at the same extent as the 3.4, it will be at 7.2, and it will be extended to the west. The required rear setback is 300 feet. And the existing obviously will not be greater than 3.4, but certainly not at 300. Additionally, the lot coverage in open space will exceed the requirements and therefore a variance will be required. Namely, the 17.6% and 78% respectively, that is 17.6% lot coverage and 78.8% open space exists. And there's 12% required, and excuse me, that's proposed, and there's 12% required and 85% required. Interestingly, and I'm going to go over this in a minute, you can go to the next slide, Andy. Interestingly, the area used to be an R2 district, and for many good reasons, the city adopted a few years ago the High Street Residential District. But Coffin's Court and the lots immediately adjacent to Marches Hill are unlike the rest of the lots along High Street, and for the purposes we'll talk about in a little bit, don't have the same ability or certainly need to serve the purposes that the High Street Residential District do. And this neighborhood is much different than the rest of the High Street District, although it is within the High Street Residential District. I would just point out to the board that the R2 district requires 25% lot coverage and 40% open space, which this would certainly far exceed. So with that, here is the plot plan. You can see Coffin's Court. This is at the end of Coffin's Court. And this lot, as you can see from this plan, in a little while, I'll show you some photographs. And when Bill goes over the architectural plans, you're going to be able to note. But the front of the property on Coffin's Court is at a much lower grade than where the house currently sits and the rear of this property. And then as you travel to the southwest on this lot towards the rear, there's a growth up, hence it goes up towards Marches Hill where the water tank is. That's the city property to the immediate adjacent to the bottom of this photo, which is to the east. So this property has some significant topographical challenges, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And as you can see from this photograph, is also very oddly shaped, and certainly a very oddly shaped as compared to the rest of the lots on Coffin's Court and even the lots adjacent that front on High Street. So with that, what I'm going to do, go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill to review his proposed architectural plans.
Thank you. My name is Bill Subkoff. I'm one of the principals at TMS Architects in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And would it be possible to go back to that site plan for just a second? Yeah, one of the things I'd like to point out is the significant change in the topography, which does have an impact on the existing house as well as the proposed additions. Where the existing house is shown on that kind of tucked into the right-hand corner of the lot is really one of the high points. And if you were to transition from the first floor of the existing house to Coffin Street, you go down approximately, depending on where you are on Coffin's Court, excuse me, about 7 to 8 feet. So it is significantly higher than the street, which is also going to provide an opportunity for us with the design to incorporate a garage underneath the proposed in-law apartment. The topography on the right side, which would be the northeast, with the house about 4 or 5 feet away from the property at 6 Coffins Court, there's actually a retaining wall there, and the grade drops off 3 or 4 feet precipitously at that side of the site. So the site isn't flat, and it does pose some potential problems with the design. If you could go to the next slide. This is a elevation taken from the back of the property. If you're standing with looking towards Coffins Court, and you'll see in the lighter lines on the left-hand side are the outline of the existing historic home. And then to the right in the darker lines are the proposed addition. On the far right, you'll see a barn-like structure, which we're proposing to be the in-law apartment. And to the right of that is actually an exterior roof covering an outdoor patio, not enclosed, but just an outdoor space that has some cover from the sun and inclement weather. To the left of the barn structure is the infill of the existing home, which is an expansion of the existing home to provide a family room and casual eating area. And that's shown with the gable and the arched roof addition. The next slide is taken from Coffins Court. And as you can see, in the lighter line on the right-hand side is the elevation of the historic home. And one of the things that I tried to do with the design is to make a clear distinction between the historic home and the proposed addition. I felt it was important that the historic home should stand proud by itself. And I used the in-law apartment as almost a carriage house, if you will, perpendicular to the main elevation of the historic home. You'll also notice that the connector between the barn / in-law apartment and the house is done with a roof and connecting exterior wall that connects the in-law apartment to the house. That actual connection, which has a stair underneath it, allows access from the driveway level up to the first floor level of the existing house. And that's where that 7 or 8 foot elevation drop from the historic home to Coffins Court gave me the opportunity to incorporate a garage underneath. And that stair that you're seeing is actually an outside stair. It is not enclosed, but someone driving into the driveway or into the garage can exit the side door of the garage, undercover, walk up that stair, and come into a rear vestibule at the back of the house. Next slide, please. This elevation is taken from the eastern or western side of the property, looking back towards the old house. You'll see the side of the barn, the porch area that has the covered roof, and then the addition on the corner of the existing historic home. The intent with the in-law apartment was to have it appear as a barn or a carriage house, if you will, that easily could have been added somewhere in the historic evolution of the existing house. And you'll notice that the roof line is at a right angle to the main roof line of the old house. That was intentional to break up the length of the house, which the existing facade is about 60 feet long. And I felt it was important to kind of create a terminus at the end of the proposed addition so that the main house stood by itself. And then the next sketch is the calculation of the portions of the existing historic facade that would be covered with the proposed addition. And it's approximately 23% of the facade of the existing house. Allowable is 25%. And if you notice on the side elevation at the top right, that green gable is set back behind the window on the corner of the old house. That was done intentionally to help make a massing separation between the in-law apartment and the main house, and allow that window into the corner of the existing house to be visible from the street, as well as allowing a view out to the property. The next slide is the floor plan of the proposed in-law apartment. The in-law apartment is connected to the main house by that stairway. The stairway that you see between the in-law apartment and the existing house is actually covered with an exterior roof. And you'll notice that that stairway is set back approximately 6.5 feet from the front facade of the old home, again, to make a separation so that the old house stood on its own and was separated with a connecting element to the in-law apartment. The quadrant that you see the word addition is that corner of the house that is presently just an exterior brick patio that we're squaring off with the back of the house and the side of the house to provide the in-law, or excuse me, the family room, casual eating area, a half bathroom, and then an exterior vestibule that would allow access out that door, down the stair, and to the driveway and garage below. The next sketch is a quick perspective that I did looking head on to the garage. And as you can see, the old house on the right is presently wood clapboards painted a yellow, a little bit lighter than that sketch shows. The sides of the house and the rear of the house are red cedar shingles that have weathered to a fairly dark brown. And we're proposing that the connector between the house and the in-law carriage house also be done in the red cedar to break up the materials. The barn, we were proposing to use a vertical board with a stone base so that the three different materials would help to break up and articulate and assist in breaking down the scale of the house. And the last photograph gives you a little bit better view of that connector. So as you can see that stair in the middle, that takes you, part of the challenge here was that the main living level is 8 feet above, but we wanted to provide an easy access from the parking, the garage driveway and the garage that will allow them to be able to go up the exterior stair and to the back vestibule at the rear of the house. And again, the material changes were intended to allow the house to stand proudly on its own, with the carriage house and the link being of a different scale through the material use of the materials.
Thank you, Bill.
Sure.
Good. Next slide, please, Andy. So here are the photos of the existing conditions. As you can see, Bill indicated that the yellow in the house is a little lighter than what was in the sketches, but nonetheless, I think what's really important, and the reason that these photos, I took these photos, is that you actually see the topography changes on the lot itself as it goes up the street. Next slide, please. And here's where the addition and connection is going to go. Again, you can see if you actually drove up there, and I know many of you actually do your own site visits ahead of time, this is actually a lot steeper than what it looks like from this photograph. You can see the back of the car in the driveway dropping down at the street, but you can also see the topographic changes that exist here and the lot line, the lot shape differences, as you can see that fence come out towards the street. Next slide, please. And then here's a look back a little bit further up on the property, looking back at the house. And again, you can see how the topography starts to really go up right at the edge of that driveway towards the left in this photograph. Next slide, please. And what I wanted to show with these next two city assessors maps views is the difference between Coffin's Court and the properties to the east of Coffin's Court versus the properties to the west of this property on down High Street, which are really what I would call more the retreat lots on High Street, and which I think probably everybody would agree is what the HSRA is really meant to protect. But as you can see, the house lots on Coffin's Court are certainly much smaller with a much greater lot coverage and open space ratios as compared to the other High Street retreat lots. Next slide, please. And this shows a little bit more, a little greater view of that and emphasizes my point. And if you go to the next slide, please. So with that, the applicant needs 3 permits. The first permit is a special permit for nonconformities. And the board needs to find that there will be no addition of new nonconformities and that the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. So in this instance, there will be no new nonconformities created, but for which we're seeking a variance, obviously. While some may be exacerbated by the length along that rear lot line and the front lot line, no new ones will be created. The board can also find that the proposal is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. As I noted from the attached assessor's maps, the property is the last home on Coffin's Court on the west side. There are no structures beyond, and there won't be any structures beyond that City of Newburyport property, nor are there any structures adjacent to the proposed addition. The proposed addition is designed in a manner to be consistent with the scale and massing of the existing single-family structure. The existing structure is reminiscent of it's a Federalist house, but kind of a manor house the way it's up on that hill. And the attached in-law unit is much like the attached carriage houses that may have one time existed. Similarly, the new infill single-story addition on the rear is architecturally appropriate for the existing structure. In fact, as Bill noted, it's already being built upon what exists as a patio. It's smaller than the building and is designed to pick up some of the key architectural features of the existing home, like the peaked roof that Bill pointed out. Further, there are no residents opposite the proposed addition on the adjacent property and therefore will have no impact on them. Along the same lines, the new carriage house, if you will, an in-law apartment is smaller than the existing structure and picks up on design elements of the home, but differentiates itself, as Bill noted. The architect has taken advantage of the topography of the area and built a garage under the in-law apartment, so the apartment is on the same plane as the first floor of the existing structure. Based upon that, and the evidence presented, the board can find that the proposed additions are not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure. We also need a variance. Next slide, please. So the applicant is exceeding the lot coverage requirements and the open space requirements for the HSRA. As I indicated earlier, Coffin's Court and the properties adjacent to Marches Hill are outliers in the High Street residential area. The idea of the rear of these lots being preserved is still accomplished with what we're proposing on this project. The lot coverage requirement for the HSRA is no more than 12%, and the open space requirement is at least 85%. The existing lot coverage is 10.6, and the existing open space is 86.3. The proposal is to have the lot coverage at 17.6%. I might remind the board, which is still well below the typical 25% in the R2, which Coffin's Court is much more reminiscent of. And the open space at 78.8%, which is far greater than the 40% open space requirement for the R2, which again, Coffin's Court is much more reminiscent of. And I would dare to say that as you look at those houses on Coffin's Court, none of them are at 12 and 85%. Both dimensions are significantly greater than the adjacent and fellow Coffin's Court's lots. As previously mentioned, the proposed in-law apartment is to allow Cheryl to remain in her home and allow Rachel and her family to return to Newburyport and live with her mother. her children's grandmother. In order to accommodate this, Mrs. Smith would like to live independently. Here, the board can find that the grant of a variance is based upon the hardship related to topography, shape, or soil condition of the property and the structure. As you can see from the site plan and the assessor's map and the photographs, the property has a very odd shape, unlike any of the surrounding properties. While wider at Coffin's Court, there's an immediate jog inward, narrowing the lot to the east, and the lot is narrowest in the front and the windows, and widens at the rear. In addition, as you can see from the photographs and elevations, the topography of the lot has made the construction and design of this addition a challenge. It is more flat at the rear, as Bill noted, but drops toward the street and rises as you come to the end of Coffin's Courts towards the rear of the lot. Finally, the topography and the age of the existing structure come into play in extending the in-law addition to the side. You will see that while the design includes an attachment to the house, the architect has been very careful not to remove the wall. Rather, it is covered, thereby preserving the architectural structure to the greatest extent possible. In addition, the location of the in-law addition really has no place else to be given the setback requirements and shape and topography of the lot. If the topography and lot shape were different, the addition could have been moved more close to the existing structure, maybe. Given the age of the structure, that may not have been the best thing to do. However, great care has been taken not to disturb the existing foundation and rather construct a new foundation for the proposed in-law and garage and merely put a covering connecting the two. Further, the shape of the lot and the combination of the topographical challenge and existing historic structure are also unique to the property and unlike the remainder of the neighborhood. The proposal does not derogate from the intent of the ordinance. Here, the lot is largely open, remains free of structures other than this home. I'll note the change on the plan. Andy, if you could go back up to the site plan, I just want to point something out. In your packages, you have, there's a shed on the rear of the lot that's not marked to be removed, but is actually being removed. And so we provided the office with a new plan today that shows that shed is being removed, which is what you see here. But as you can see on this plan, this is a very odd shaped lot. And what Bill has done, part of the additional lot coverage is this connection to the original structure, which is actually not living space at all, but made in a manner by which to have a connection to the building. And it goes against both lot coverage and open space. And so he's done that to preserve the historic integrity of that side of the structure, but also because the topography that is in that area of the lot itself. The other thing I like about this, seeing this, and then we can show it in relationship to the photographs, is you can see actually where the addition is coming out to. So if you see the jog in this, where the lot narrows from Coffin's Court moving up to the west, right at the edge of where the in-law apartment wall is, that's actually at the edge of the current driveway. So Andy, if you could slide back down to the photographs. Go to the next one. Let's see if it's a better shot. There you go. So at the edge of that current driveway, you'll see that essentially the edge of the far edge of the in-law comes out about that space in relationship to the house. The proposal doesn't derogate from the intent of the ordinance. Here, the lot largely remains open and free of structures other than the home, as I showed on the site plan above. The purpose of the HSRA is to preserve the rear areas of the homes on High Street, and the proposed addition does not take away from that purpose. In addition to preserving the streetscape of High Street, and this particular lot does not abut High Street. The proposal remains at the front of the lot and is as compact as possible. The property is not abutting High Street, as I noted, rather it's tucked in off of Coffin's Court. The proposal will not derogate from the intent and purpose of the ordinance, as it maintains the historic integrity of the structure while preserving the rear of the property, and certainly has no detrimental impact on High Street. and the view on High Street. Further, the proposed change will not be detrimental to the neighborhood, as there will be no negative impacts on the neighbors as a result of the granting of the variance. As noted previously, the proposed additions do not abut any of the surrounding homes. Further, this is the last structure on the street. The design is sensitive to the existing structures and surrounding homes. There will be no detrimental impact on the neighbors. Finally, no special privilege will be granted to the applicant. Here, all of the homes on Coffin's Court, and Andy, if you could just slide down to the slide 15. Thank you. All of the homes on Coffin's Court, as you can see, have a much greater amount of lot coverage and less open space than is required under the ordinance or what is even being proposed with this proposal before the board. The proposal is actually more consistent with the ordinance than existing conditions on the remainder of Coffin's Court, and as a result, there is no special privilege in that regard. As to the property that is immediately adjacent and which fronts on High Street, there's also no special privilege there in that relationship, as that lot is significantly larger than any of the other lots on Coffin's Court or even the property, and in fact abuts High Street. As a result, there will be no special privilege granted to the applicant. And before I go on to the in-law apartment requirements, and you can go ahead and slide down to, I think, slide 19. We have provided to the board letters of support from all of the adjacent abutters for this property, including 47 High Street, 6 Coffin's Court, 11 Coffin's Court, and 7 Coffin's Court. You may not have the one from 47 High Street as it came in late today and was forwarded to the office late this evening. As for the special permit for the in-law apartment, will be occupied by a parent, children and grandchildren. Actually, the in-law apartment will be occupied by Cheryl, who is the parent of Rachel and the grandmother of the children of Rachel. The dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance are otherwise met if the board approves the prior permits requested. The gross floor area is not exceeding 700 square feet as required. The zoning board may impose reasonable conditions related to parking. Here, there is sufficient parking for at least 4 vehicles, 2 within the garage and 2 in the driveway. The safety, health, and building codes are all met. In order to become effective, the special permit granted under this section shall be recorded, and the permit will be recorded as required. In the 11th and 23rd months following the grant or renewal of the special permit hereunder, the homeowner will certify under the pains and penalties of perjury that the appropriate people are still living in the apartment to satisfy the requirements of the ordinance, and the applicant will comply with these requirements. Further, the applicant agrees with the terms related to if the certification is not filed pursuant to the requirements, the permit will expire, or if the in-law ceases to be occupied as provided, it will expire, and it will expire at the expiration of 3 years unless it's granted a renewal by the board. Where new kitchen or kitchen appliance have been added, they will be removed within 6 months after the expiration of the special permit. The applicant agrees with that. And the Zoning Board of Appeals may order an inspection of the premises for compliance, and the applicant would agree with that, of course. As a result, having demonstrated that the proposed addition to the residence is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structures, that the variance request can be approved because the applicant has shown that it meets the criteria of the variance, and also because the applicant has shown that it meets the criteria related to the grant and requirements of the in-law apartment, the applicant requests the board grant the requested special permits and variance as set forth. And we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. With that, we will conclude the presentation portion of the public hearing and open up the floor for public comment. Andy, if you could just put the slide up, and anyone who is listening in who wishes to speak, just click the raise hand button and we will recognize you and just ask you to keep your comments to within 2 minutes. Seeing no hands yet, and I don't think we have any callers. I do see one hand, Stephanie Nikitich, and we'll go ahead and unmute Ms. Nikodich's mic, and Stephanie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephanie Nikotich, 93 High Street. I would like to make 3 points. One is that this is another application with a very tight tolerance to escape DCOD review and an historical commission advisory. So I wanted to mention, this is the Coffin Woodman House, a documented 18th century Georgian era building. I and many others in Newburyport are grateful to longtime residents like Mrs. Smith, who have maintained and preserved these increasingly rare examples of Newburyport's heritage. 2, as far as I know, this is the first request for a variance in the HSRA district. This zoning was unanimously adopted in 2017 by the City Council to preserve the historic pattern of open space along the High Street Ridge. I am myself a 30-year owner of what is now a non-conforming building and lot in the HSRA. I supported wholeheartedly its adoption. I don't want to see the HSRA dimensional protections eroded, so I am concerned about clearly warranted and uniform application of the variance requirements. The need for a variance is lot coverage and open space. This is both because of the in-law garage addition and an addition to the primary building. The primary building addition is described as a change to accommodate a family of 4. The current living space of this house is about 36,000 square feet. I'm sorry, 3,600 square feet. This is similar to the size of my house, where we spaciously raised 2 children and still spaciously hosted 2 other children during the summer and holidays, basically a family of 6. As far as I could see, the measurements provided ignore the addition to the primary building. My question to the chair is, if that addition were eliminated, would a variance be needed? 3, I appreciate the design of the in-law addition. The renderings suggest quality materials to harmonize with the historic building. However, materials are not specified on the plans. I hope you may ask that they are, so that you can understand them and condition any approval you might make on specific materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nikodic. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone else? Seeing no hands at the moment. Going once, going twice. Okay, we will close that portion of the public hearing and go to questions from the board. And we'll begin with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Chairman Ciampetti. I am going to dovetail off of Ms. Nikotich's question, because that was the question, one of the questions I was going to ask. And that was if the applicant had done any impact numbers on what the connector and the fill-in addition in the back did to the lot coverage. Did you do a with and without type of sensitivity analysis?
So I, given our current circumstances, I have actually just sent that question to Mr. Sukoff. So I don't exactly have an answer quite yet, but let me say that so the existing lot coverage is 10.6, which is 2,307. So 12% is 2,611. So even the in-law at 700 would put it over the 12%, right? 700. If the in-law was smack up against the house, it would put it over the 12% by 304 square feet. So even with that, you're over it. So the connector, I don't know if Bill can answer how wide the connector is. The connector is going to put it over even more. And so the total square footage over the 26 is another 12, maybe. No, that's not right. Bill, do you have the square footage of the connector?
Yeah, the connector is 8 feet by, hold on just a second.
And this could be a math problem we can come back to and let other questions go, but I got a feeling it might start with this one anyway. So
8 feet by 12. So It's probably, it's just over
96 square
100
feet.
Yeah, about
Yeah.
100 square feet,
Right. And the rear addition is approximately,
500 square feet.
okay. So we would
Yes.
still be over even with the, just with the in-law. And if the in-law were smack up against the house, which I think probably, I don't want to put words in Ms. Nikitic's mouth, would not be a preferred approach.
I might agree with that, but again, we won't guess on her opinion on that.
Right.
I thank you for that, and that's all the questions I have for now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. Moving on to Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to dovetail off Mr. Moore's question and ask about the covered porch to the south. How does that figure into the open space and lot coverage formula?
That goes against one, but not the other.
Okay.
Building coverage is, it goes against the lot coverage, but not the open space. Hang on a second, Mr. Delisle, I'll tell you exactly. And I had this out to answer that exact question. Covered by building area, right? So it goes against the open space, not the lot coverage.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. What could, so the High Street A zoning district applies to Coffin Court, which is interesting because it's unlike High Street B zoning district, which does not apply to, you know, Arlington Street or Lafayette Street, or other side streets going south off of High Street,
Right.
On the other side. So that's interesting from my perspective. And it's interesting in the sense that it sort of cuts both ways, right? Because the city council, in setting forth what's covered by High Street A, clearly intended for Coffin's Court to be included under this, it would appear, and they clearly intended for those other streets in High Street B not to be included because they're not. So I think that, you know, this is another instance here where we have the variance request and the board has discretion to grant that request. And here it seems to me like, again, we're in a tough position where you have what appears to be the city council's intent to have Coffin's Court included in High Street A.
Right.
So that being the long way around the barn to get to, can you give me your thoughts on that?
I can, and I think I actually have looked at this carefully because I understand the both districts, and if you could go to the further out my maps. So and I wasn't a part of the adoption, and so I'm gonna, and Stephanie has already spoken to this a little bit, but the next one down, right? Is this the further one out? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the goal, as Stephanie indicated, was really to protect the rear of these properties from being developed upon, right? And to maintain kind of the majestic, if you will, most of the homes that are on the ridge, right? And we can start with down at the corner of State and High Street, right after the mobile station, right? And all those houses, beginning with Ms. Nikitic's, moving all the way down or up on the ridge. Very few are down on the street, and many of them have the rear, let's say, retreat lots. In fact, a number of the property owners, and quite honestly, I'm working with somebody right now, have put restrictions on the rear of their lots to protect them, from future development or, building or things like that. But Coffin's Court, there we go. Coffin's Court is different. And I don't know why the city council didn't take the time to exempt Coffin's Court and those properties right around Marches Hill, because the reality is the city owns the rear property on this, if you will. So if you can scroll up on this My Map a little bit, you can see all that, see the land that abuts it, that's city property. All the way back is city property up to the water tower. So at the end of Coffin's Court, the adjacent property to this is all city property, not to be developed. And Marches Hill, of course, is city property. Marches Hill is in the HRSA or HSRA. So I'm not sure, what the thought process is, and I can't put my self in their position, except for that it's clear that the purpose of the ordinance is to protect let's call it the majestic home sitting on the ridge and the rear open space. And hence the significant and quite frankly, odd setback requirements, right? 300 feet to the rear, 75 feet from the front. This property does not front on High Street. It fronts on Coffin's Court. And so their rear is opposite Coffin's Court. That's supposed to be a 300-foot setback. But the reality is here, really what needs to be protected by the ordinance is the property to the south, right? And we're not really encroaching on that, although we could encroach on that if we had the open space and lot area to 75 feet, because that's a side setback. So I think that even by exceeding the open space and lot coverage, we're still in harmony with the ordinance, because the ordinance oddly applies to Coffin's Court. And the houses on Coffin's Court aren't necessarily what the HSRA was meant to protect. Certainly the historic nature of those houses, and this house isn't the only one, need to be protected, and the DCOD protects it, as does the demolition delay, depending on what applies. But I don't think the proposal here negatively impacts or doesn't stay congruent with the HSRA. I think it's one of those lots, as is any one of them on Coffin's Court, that doesn't fit squarely within the HSRA. And even this one, the rear part of the lot, which is actually the side yard, is going to be protected.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you on that. That it certainly, what the proposal is here is consistent with the, I think, what the intent of the HSRA zoning district is. So the second thing I'd like to ask you about is if you could just reiterate for me the hardship here.
Sure. So again, this is to the structure because of its historic nature, Mr. Swanton, to our earlier conversation. But importantly, it's the topography and shape related to that, right? Because of the topography, if you could go to the elevation, maybe the first elevation, Andy, because of the topography, sorry, go to the next, there we go. You really, the way the house is situated and this structure, you want to pull it away from the historic house. You would have to push it up against and to the rear into that historic structure because of the way the topography is. Also, because of the shape of that lot, if you want to go back up to the site plan right before this, because of the shape of the lot, if you pushed it against it and pushed it back to try to save space, it quite frankly would damage the historic structure, which is why Bill has designed it away from the historic structure. And so in doing that, it takes up more open space and lot coverage because you have that connector added onto it.
Okay, thank you for that. Andy, can you leave it on this slide here? Attorney Mead, at the very sort of southernmost end of the in-law apartment, the proposed in-law, I don't, that's not, it's more than an in-law apartment. The carriage house, that's a better way to describe it because it's very calmly building. So that corner, that sort of southeastern corner, as it goes to the that sort of corner of the lot line, that's further away from, or that distance is greater than the distance of the from the northeastern corner to the lot line below that. So there's nothing new being created with that addition. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's already non-conforming. And so we're exacerbating it, but we're not creating a new non-conformity.
Okay. All right. And then the last thing I'll ask about, and maybe this goes to the architect, if he could just sort of describe what the materials are going to be used, because I think that Ms. Nikitic's point as to the materials being used on this addition, this carriage house, because it is such an excellent looking building that we would want to make sure that the materials are of equal quality to the drawing. So if I could just ask that of the architect.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Could you put up slide 11? Yeah, the intent was for but let me back up for just a second. Interestingly, the existing house has a stone foundation, I'm sorry, a brick foundation that's painted red, which is actually very handsome. My intent was not to do that on the carriage house or the barn. My preference would be to do that out of a field stone. It probably would be a 4-inch field stone applied over the foundation. From that point up, my intent was to use vertical shiplap boards, random width, that could easily be seen on a structure, a barn structure like this. So it would give you kind of a pinstripe on the exterior of the barn. The connector of the barn carriage house to the old house, I think I'd like that to match the red cedar shingles of the existing house. I think that makes sense, and I kind of like the three materials together. The intent was that, believe it or not, the existing house has wood roof shingles, and cedar shingles, and we haven't talked about that other than the fact that Cheryl did say that she would like to do that. That is a very expensive approach, but if not the wood shingled roof, then it would probably be an architectural shingle, which is a heavier shingle with more texture, with the coloration that would simulate a weathered red cedar shingle roof.
Bill, I'm just going to interrupt for a second because I have just learned that I feel like I'm on the news. I have just learned that a client will use red cedar shingles on the roof of the barn.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's great. That would be the intent then. And the trim would probably be, to be honest with you, I haven't used real wood trim for years. They make Boral is a high density polymer product that simulates wood. When it's painted, you can't tell the difference. And just from a maintenance standpoint, that's what I would propose for all the exterior trim.
Okay, that's good to know. And what about the windows? Just I guess to finalize or to.
Yeah, the intent would be to do them in wood windows with SDL, simulated divided lights, which will look like the real thing. For the top sash, I'd like to do the top sash in the 6 light and the bottom sash below open, just to give a little more openness from the view inside. And also then you can use a single screen on the outside which doesn't cover the muttons and puts them in shadow. I've done that for years, and it's a nice look, and the small panes above really tie it back into the existing house. I haven't discussed that with my client. The other option would be to do a 6/6 SDL, simulated divided light wood window that would match the existing house. All the trim on the windows, the existing house has a band molding that wraps around the flat casing and head of the windows. We would do the same thing with a wooden sill with the tongues extended past the trim, which would simulate what's on the old house. So it's going to look very similar to the character and quality of all the windows in the existing house.
Thank you for that. That sounds very nice. Thank you. I have no additional questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Moving on to Mr. Swanton.
Some of my questions have already been asked. Just to finish on materials, you mentioned the vertical board would be shiplap. What is the actual material?
It's a boral. It's a high, AZAC is another material. It's a high density polymer, and it doesn't rot. But believe me, when you paint it, you don't know it's not the real thing. It's
I'm
just like,
I'm familiar with AZAC.
Yeah.
Going back to Mr. Moore asked about the size of the various things, and I didn't quite write them down quickly enough. The addition, this in-law apartment's like 700 square feet. I think you
Correct.
mentioned that little connector that shows in this drawing. Is that like 200? What is that? I couldn't write it down.
96 square feet?
96, yeah.
96. Okay, and if I look in the assessor's records, the house is currently 3,652 square feet. So if I add the 700 square feet for the in-law and the 96 for the little addition, it's a big house. I mean, that's 4,448 right there. And then you want to put another 500 square feet on the back. So basically you're getting to just about 5,000 square feet between the two additions and the little connector, unless my math's off there, as far as the size of the house for these 4 people. And people should be able to build any size house they want. But the thing here in this case is you're asking for a variance in a district that the city council only a few years ago put in place unanimously. And for some reason or another, as they, I think Mr. Delisle went over this, is they included this. I'm not sure why, but they did. And I'm not really here to second guess them. So I guess if you were just looking for the in-law apartment and the little connector and the nice materials and whatnot that you're using, and just went a little bit over the 12%, that the city council put in place, that'd be one thing. But then to put another 500 square feet in the back at the same time, that's where I'm having problems. So could you speak to that?
Sure. I'm going to answer part of it, and then Bill, you can talk about it a little bit too. So there are 2 families, right? This is an in-law and a house. So, right. So there are 2 families here, not one family. So there's 4 people in the main house, and then a person in the in-law. Secondly, as Ms. Nikitic actually pointed out, the house is very old, and the way the interior of the house is laid out currently doesn't really fit the needs of the family that's going to move in there now. And so the goal was to provide a little more space on the first floor to open that up and make it more usable for current conditions. We all might recall that, we're all in a different time right now, and who knows what's going to happen and who's going to be living at home and working at home and being educated at home all at the same time. So Bill, you can talk a little bit more about the interior of the house and how you want to retain some of those original structure, some of the original pieces and way it's laid out, and one of the reasons why you put on the addition.
Yeah, I would like to speak to that, because this is a very good example of where I think the historical integrity of the interior of the house has a major impact on how the house lives. And if you look at this site plan and go to the right-hand side where the outline of the existing house is, you'll see the bump out going towards Coffin's Court. Well, that bump out is obviously the front entrance, which is quite frankly not used very often. But from that point to the back of the house is a hallway. And to the right of that, the two rooms on the right side of that are absolutely, I don't know if any of you have been in the house, but they are absolutely some of the finest example of Georgian interior detailing I've ever seen. They are exquisite, but like so many of these houses, they're exquisite, but they're not very livable. And I think that parts of the year, Cheryl doesn't even use those two rooms. She leaves them as they were. They're decorated with antiques, but they're really not, from a functional standpoint, a very livable part of the house. Now that quadrant in the back where you see remove entry, where that word is, that's the kitchen. So if you take the right side of that where the hallway goes from front to back, that whole right side of the house is not very livable. Or it's historic and they really don't, it doesn't function very well. Where the entry, the remove entry word is, that's where the kitchen is. So by adding that, filling in that corner where the brick patio is, all of a sudden you can get the kitchen, the family room, the casual eating area, the vestibule, the half bath, to all be together, which is really the American lifestyle. We all tend to live in the kitchen, family room, and casual dining area. So even though the house is big, I agree with that. But because Cheryl has been so meticulous about maintaining the historic character of the right-hand side of the house, by adding that addition allows Cheryl's children to have a very livable interior that works for a family in today's society. And if you walk through the house, you get it in a minute. Did that help?
I have no more questions, so next.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Moving on then to Mr. Bennett.
I have no questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. And I too, I defer to the questions that have been asked that were originally mine, but my colleagues had shared. So I'm satisfied as well. I think it's been well vetted, so thank you. And with that, we can close that portion of the public hearing and go to deliberations. I remind my colleagues on the board that as we deliberate, we should tailor our deliberations around the legal criteria, or I should say the permitting criteria for both the dimensional variance, which was the first of the three applications for relief, the special permit for non-conformities to construct the in-law, and the new one-story addition in the rear, and then finally the special permit to allow the in-law apartment. So with that, keeping those three, the criteria for the three permits being requested in mind, we'll go back at the top of the batting order to Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Chairman Ciampetti. I'm going to go in generalities and not get too in depth. First of all, I mean, I really want to commend the architect in blending old with the new. I mean, I think the addition is well considered, planned, thought out, and the consideration to set apart the historic house from the carriage house addition. I think in the way it's done, I think is brilliant. It's great. Again, the biggest issue and the reason I was looking for the dimensions is I think the connector works. I'd hate to see the connector go. It was what would the impact be if that little back fill-in corner wasn't done? But I appreciated the explanation of, when you walk into these old historic homes and colonials, I used to call it, the living room to nowhere. When you took a corner, you were stuck in a room. So and having not been in that house, I understand where he's coming from. So that was helpful. The variance issue on lot coverage and open space, the way that lot looks, I did check it out. It's crazy with the different heights and topography that surrounds it. And then the fact that the only way you could go if you wanted to do this, and I think it's reasonable to have an in-law apartment on a lot that size with all that space to one end. I just don't see that hurting too much. So I'm just going to speak in generalities and let my colleagues pick up from there. And I'll come back with more comments if need be.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to note to Mr. Sukoff that his explanation as to the right side of the existing structure was, I think, very helpful for me as well, as it relates to sort of the desire for that additional back room addition that sort of resonates with me. I understand that. So I think, taking things one step at a time, I think the first one is the variance. So we'll go through that first. I think that here, clearly, and I went up there today, we clearly have the odd shaped lot and the undulating topography of that lot, just slightly different than some of the other lots. I mean, they're all on a hill, going up a hill, but that one really kind of goes up and down and up again. So I think that even though we're talking about lot coverage and open space, I think that we have enough here to get us over the variance hurdle, that these conditions are unique to the applicant's lot. I think we can check the box on that. That the strict application of the provisions of the chapter depriving the applicant of reasonable use of the lot is probably the fuzziest one, but I think here, we have a situation where the family is looking to have the in-law apartment, and if we were to strictly apply the requirements of the High Street A zoning district, that would not allow for that. So I think this is maybe the fuzziest point, but I think we can check the box on that. Unique circumstances and conditions are not not the result of actions of the applicant. That is satisfied, and the relief will not constitute a grant of a special privilege. I think here this is satisfied as well, because we do have a situation on Coffin's Court where all these lots are much smaller than what was contemplated in the High Street A overlay district. So I think from the variance perspective, for me, I can support the variance here. And I do also think that even though we are allowing this to go over the open space and the lot coverage requirements of the High Street A zoning district, it's a unique circumstance because, number one, as noted, we're not on High Street, even though we are in the district set forth by the city council. We're on a lot that's much smaller than the majority of the lots that were affected by this zoning district. And I think importantly, the purpose of the ordinance is to discourage sort of infill and subdivision of these really large high street lots. And I think that here, what's being proposed does not run afoul of that sort of fear. So I think for the variance, for me, I can support the variance. The special permit for non-conformities, there's no new non-conformity, and I don't believe that what is proposed here would be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than what is there. It's different than what's there, but the plan is well conceived and well designed, and it looks very nice. So I think that relative also to where it's situated in the neighborhood, sort of up on the right-hand side of the hill as you go up Coffin's Court, it's a bit unto itself. So I think that, again, it's not more detrimental to the neighborhood.
Very good.
with regard to the,
Go ahead. Sorry about that, Stephen.
yeah, no, that's okay. I was, although I could leave the in-law special permit findings for another member. So maybe I'll do that and just, I'll end my thoughts here and come back if necessary.
Okay, well, I certainly didn't mean to interrupt. I kind of took the pause as though you may have been finished, but we'll see if it gets hit with, that puts all the pressure on Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, what say you, sir?
Well, I guess I think this is again a tasteful design. I have no question and qualms regarding the in-law apartment or the covered connector. I think it's an elegant architectural addition. However, I have to say that I have a real problem with the addition. It seems to me that the in-law apartment has been a stalking horse for adding 500 feet to this structure. And although I stand to be convinced, I cannot see meeting the criteria that somehow the addition of 500 feet to a 3,600 foot building is necessary for the reasonable use of the structure. And if that were a standalone application, I would vote against it in a New York minute if it required a variance. So I guess I'm having a difficult time not unbundling this application, because I think the in-law apartment, which there are strong policy considerations in favor of in-law apartments, and I think the ordinance encourages those in-law apartments, and that's fine, and I have no problem with that. But I'm struggling with the other piece of that, and I'm not sure where that takes me. But I guess I'll make a decision in a moment.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. I think that in terms of my sentiment on this, I do agree with many of my colleagues on the tastefulness of the application. I do share some of the concerns about the massing and scale, but as I see it in mass, it does seem appropriate given the area and the lot. And I like the attention to architectural detail is certainly greatly appreciated for me as well. So I for all of the reasons that I think many of my colleagues have already articulated, and I won't go into repeating, I feel like I can support all three of these applications. Okay, so with that, we can close that portion of the.
Wait.
I was going to say that, Ken.
I think you missed me.
Oh,
I think you missed a couple.
I thought we rounded through it. My apologies. Where we had Mr. Bennett. Where did I leave off?
I may have jumped the line. Sorry.
Well, you were offered the spot, and
Exactly.
perhaps I should have jumped in. But anyway, I just like to comment.
So go ahead. I think was it Mark? Are we?
I think you wanted to hit Mr. Swan, and also Mr. Chagnon, I think, is on board this one too. So.
You're absolutely right. My apologies. So, Mr. So I've jumped the gun, and my apologies. I must have just read myself as behind following Mr. Bennett. Mr. Swanton, I think we missed you, and then we'll go to Mr. Chagnon, who's voting on this application.
Okay, Mr. Swanton speaking. I like this picture. Several of my colleagues have already said it's a nice design. The one person spoke during the open comments also complimented the design. Like the materials also are good. I'm glad those were specified. My issue had been as Mr. Bennett said, the addition in the back. One of the good things about the addition in the back is you can't see it, at least not from the street. It's back there somewhere in this picture, but that's to its credit. But I do feel a little awkward about having the first variance in this new zoning district be created so we can create a house of nearly 5,000 total square feet. So I do have a concern there, but I'm sort of on the fence, quite frankly, on whether that would turn me off to the whole project or not. And so that's where I am. I'll listen to what Mr. Chagnon has to say and take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess like some of my colleagues, I'm comfortable with the dimensional variance requested. I'm also comfortable with the special permit for non-conformities and the special permit for the in-law apartment. I do think with the shape of the lot and the topography, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, that the variance criteria can be met, and therefore I can support it on all three of the applications. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chagnon. Okay, have I missed anybody? Because I know we went out of sequence a little bit. I want to make sure.
You got us all.
Okay, great.
Is it possible to say something?
Sure. Is this Mr. Subkoff?
Yes, it is. I just want to add one other thought that may address that concern about the size of the house. When I spoke about the two rooms to the right of the entrance foyer, there is another room that is on the left of the front entrance, which is also like the other two rooms. They are three rooms that look like a museum. And the reality is they are a wonderful example of Georgian architecture and detailing. And Cheryl has maintained those and restored them over the last 40 years meticulously. Unfortunately, they're not very comfortable rooms to be in. So even though they add to the square footage of the house, they make the house very awkward to live in as a family. And I would just offer the suggestion that maybe by being flexible on the square footage, you're maintaining and helping to maintain three magnificent historical rooms. And they're an attribute to Newburyport's history, not on the outside, because not that many people see them, but on the inside, they are like a museum. Unfortunately, not very comfortable to live in, but they're gorgeous.
And those are about 800 square feet, Bill?
Well, the two on the right side are 800. If you add the one on the front left of the entrance, that's about another about 150. So you're getting up close to 1,000 square feet with those three rooms.
Just as Mr. Swanton again, I just want to comment that I think you pushed me over the top, so I can support this.
Okay.
Okay. And certainly, I like to exercise, the discretion of the chair to, to allow the organic development of a conversation that kind of helps us as board members better understand the metrics that we're being asked to kind of dig into. Sometimes it's hard to understand fully when we're looking at two-dimensional photographs, even if we've seen the three-dimensional, site visit. But this is definitely helpful. So a little bit out of sequence, but very, very appreciated. So thank you, Mr. Subkoff and Attorney Mead, for the additional dimension that you had shared. And with that, do we have any further deliberations from any members of the ZBA before I close this portion of the public hearing? Seeing no takers, I'm going to go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing and ask, do we have a motion from a member of the ZBA? And I would say we should take these one at a time. So we'll start with the dimensional variance. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve variance application for 8 Coffins Court. That's the application 2021-45. It's Mr. Moore.
I'll second that, Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Motion's been made and seconded. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That is 6 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries.
Mr. Champetti, you actually only have a 5 voting member board.
You're right. So that means Mr. Bennett, because we have Mr. Shannon on this, Mr. Bennett becomes our alternate again. So we have 5 in the affirmative. The aye votes were Champetti, Moore, Delisle, Swanton, and Shannon. 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the application for the dimensional variance docket 2021-45 is approved. Thank you, Attorney, for pointing that out. Do we have a motion? We have the second application that's before us, docket 46, special permit for non-conformities. Do we have a motion to approve?
This is Mr. Shagnon. I'll make a motion to approve the special permit for non-conformities, docket 2021-46.
Thank you, Mr. Shagnon. Do we have a second?
Second, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Motion's made by Mr. Shagnon and seconded by Mr. Moore on the special permit for non-conformities. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shagnon.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That is 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The special permit for non-conformities, docket 46, is approved. Thank you. And do we have a motion to approve the third and final application before us on 8 Coffins Court, which is the special permit to allow the in-law apartment? Do we have a motion? Anyone?
Mr. Shagnon, I'll make a motion to approve the special permit to allow an in-law apartment for 8 Coffins Court, docket 2021-47.
Thank you, Mr. Shagnon. Do we have a second?
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Motion's made by Mr. Shagnon and seconded by Mr. Moore. Calling the roll on the on the motion to approve the special permit to allow an in-law apartment. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Shagnon. I'm sorry, Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shagnon.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The special permit to allow the in-law apartment is approved. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Attorney Mead, Mr. Sopkoff, and members of the ZBA for everyone's patience, and members of the public for your patience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that rounds us out to the what was originally our first public hearing is now at the back of the batting order. This is the application for 2 Neptune Street. The applicant Patty Ann Bampos, docket 2021-26, a special permit for non-conformities to add a dormer on the rear roof of a pre-existing non-conforming structure. And this matter was continued to this evening from the hearing on July 27th, 2021. May we hear from the applicant, Ms. Bampos? You have the floor.
Yes, good evening. My name is Patty Ann Bampos, and I'm representing myself tonight at this continuance of my application for a special permit to build a shed dormer at 2 Neptune Street. The property is in the R2 and DCOD overlay districts of the Newburyport zoning ordinance. I propose to add a shed dormer to the house to increase the living area in the structure. The resulting increase in the second floor area is approximately 140 square feet. No other changes are proposed. The lot is pre-existing non-conforming as to size, frontage, lot coverage, and open space. The minimum required lot size in the R2 district is 10,000 square feet, while this lot contains 1,621 square feet. 90 feet of frontage is required, and this lot has 87.24. The maximum lot coverage allowed is 25%, while this lot has coverage of 48.7%. The minimum open space allowed is 40%, where this lot has 51.3%. So the proposed dormer will not alter any of the above mentioned non-conformities and will not add more than 500 feet of living area. The shed dormer dimensions were revised from the last ZBA meeting to be inset 2 feet on the Water Street side and 3 feet on the opposite wall. And I will show the board why the 2-foot dimension remains as is in a later slide, but pulling in the opposite wall from 2 feet to 3 feet inset is to accommodate my 2.5 Neptune Street neighbor's desire. Although I do not believe an asymmetrical dormer is the best option, the back space is less important than the front room, which is the bathroom and has more limitations. To reiterate, there's going to be no new non-conformities to this non-conforming property. But before we go on to the next slide, I was hoping to correct a detail from the last meeting, and that was in a letter that my 2.5 Neptune Street neighbor submitted. And it was stated in the letter, just one sentence, that the purchase price also reflected the understanding that renovation would be limited by historical commissions and zoning boards. And I just wanted to let people listening and the board know that this limitation was never implied. The limitation was never discussed or stated, and the real estate brokers never brought up any kind of limitation. That's part of the reason why I had called the planning department multiple times before I actually closed on the property to really understand what I had to comply with. So I just wanted to clarify that detail. So the next slide, if we can go to the next slide on roof square footage, will potentially answer questions from the last meeting on how big will the dormer be relative to a by right dormer. And so you see the base calculation is 540 square feet. The by right dormer, which is in the newer guidelines, would cover 66% of the roof coverage. Now, at the beginning, the very first meeting, I had wanted a 1-foot inset on both sides, and that would have covered the roof by 84%. Tonight, for this meeting, which I'm referencing the 727 ZBA meeting, it's actually 21 feet by 19 feet, so it covers 399 square feet, which is 74% roof coverage. So this sheet just shows that from the start, going from a 1-foot and 1-foot inset to then a 2-foot and 2-foot inset, I'm really trying to comply with what the board wants to see as far as coverage and visibility and looks, and to try and work with what I really need for living space. So there's really only an 8% difference between a by right dormer and the dormer that I'm proposing tonight, which would cover 74%. Please see the next slide, which is SG11. This shows the proposed rear elevation. There's a 2-foot inset on the Water Street side and a 3-foot inset on the opposite wall of the building, which is the inner portion away from Water Street. If you could go to the next slide, which is SG11. This just shows if you're walking up Neptune Street or you were in my neighbor's yard at 2.5 looking out towards the water, this is what you would see from the opposite elevation. Could we go to the next slide, which is SG3? So this slide I added to demonstrate the difference between this is internally to demonstrate the difference between a by right dormer and a dormer with a 2-foot inset. So a 2-foot on the Water Street side. So the by right dormer I'm showing as a blue line in the upper right corner on the proposed second floor plan. And then the 2-foot inset is a red line, so that you can you visually see with the layout as it partially exists right now, what the difference is in that, in the by right versus the 2-foot. Now, the distance between the shower and the wall, so the window wall, is 55 inches. And the distance between the shower and the vanity is 34 inches. Just, yep. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. So that you get just a better feel of the tightness of what I'm dealing with. So per building code, which I must comply with, and if you could show slide R307, which is, I believe, the next one, actually might be 2 down. Yeah, you know what? I think it's slide number 8, but I'm not 100% sure.
I don't see that drawing in the set. I see the images and the plans that you provided.
Is 307 the next slide now, number 9?
That is the restroom.
Yep.
Yep.
So yeah, so these were pictures I had a hard time trying to extract that from the building code book online. But so this is the building code that I need to comply with. So I need 24-inch clearance in front of the shower. And with a by right dormer, which is technically 42 inches in place, there would only be 13 inches of clearance. So I would not comply with the state building code. And actually, even a 3-foot dormer, which is 36 inches inset, would only leave 19 inches of clearance around the shower. And the building code is 24 inches. So whether it's 3.5 or 3 feet, I still would not comply with the building code. And that's the balance that I'm trying to work with. I'm trying to comply with what the ZBA needs and wants to see, and what the building code will allow me to build. So I also need to comply with ceiling height requirements, which is actually slide number 8. That's the slide R305. At the front corner of the existing shower, the ceiling height currently with the current slope is 70 inches. When a minimum of 6 foot 8 inches or 80 inches is required by code. And even though I removed the ceiling, it is still not code compliant. So if I am approved to build a 2-foot inset shed dormer, the ceiling would be raised to well above 84 inches, as it would be open to the attic. And I would be able to comply with both clearances for building code. If it's possible to go to slide SG 3.1, which I believe is slide 7. Yes. So this is a spatial elevation, which shows a 6-foot person standing between the shower and the vanity. And it purely demonstrates how a person would hit their head on placement of a by right dormer, which is the blue line, versus a 2-foot inset, which is the red line. And the 2-foot inset almost aligns with the depth of the vanity. And it's less likely for a person to hit their head with the 2-foot inset. So, I mean, my goal is really to comply with the ZBA requirements while also complying with the state building code to make a more functional space. I do hope that you vote in favor of this application, as this is a private residence. However, if you do find that these dormer dimensions are not acceptable, I would ask that you please tell me what dimensions that you would approve, so that I could potentially move forward with this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bampost. And I failed to mention at the outset of this hearing, actually, I'm I am not going to be a voting member on this application. I should have allowed Vice Chair Mark Moore to open it up, but be that as it may, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Moore now, and just note for the record that as I'm not qualified on this, the 5 voting members on this application will be Mr. Moore, Mr. Delisle, Mr. Swanton, Mr. Chagnon, and Mr. Bennick. Myself being recused. So with that, Mr. Moore, you have the gavel, sir.
Thanks for teeing it up for me, Mr. Ciampetti. And with the presentation complete, we will now move on to public comment. So anyone in the attending the Zoom meeting right now that wishes to comment, please raise your hand, and remember to give your name and address before after you are recognized, and unmute your mic, and then let us hear what you have to say.
And the first person we have is Patricia Pecknick.
Great.
Patricia
Go ahead.
Pecknick, 4 Dove Street. I'd like to comment on the argument about ceiling height and the building code in general. The existing building code of Massachusetts exempts historic structures from the application of building codes that were written to regulate new construction. The historic building section of the Massachusetts Building Code states that it is the Commonwealth's intention to provide means for the preservation of historic buildings as certified by the Mass Historical Commission. And this structure is so certified by its Form B, and that historic buildings are not subject to the same code provisions. KP Law can confirm this, as can the city's building commissioner. So for example, if a property owner is restoring an historic property, they can repair using materials and methods that would not be permissible on new construction. Stairway widths may be different. Front doors may swing against the direction of travel. There's no need to comply with natural light requirements, and so on. And this is the same, except that there can be no exemptions when fire safety would be an issue. So the door is so low and narrow that a resident can't exit to safety in the event of fire. But in this case, the building code argument fails. And in addition to that, Attorney Mead made a very compelling point that the phrase structure in our zoning ordinance incorporates by logic the phrase historic, that the ZBA does consider the historic nature of structures, that arguments about the historic nature of a structure are appropriate to make before this board. And so I ask you to consider the historic nature of this structure and deny the special permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pecknick. We will now look for other comment from the public.
We do have one caller, phone number ending in 407. If you'd like to press *6, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak to the board.
Hello, am I coming in loud and clear?
Yes, you are.
Oh, wonderful. This is Reg Bacon, once again, at 21 Strong Street in Newburyport. I'm speaking against the special permit for nonconformities at 2 Neptune Street, which is one of our city's few remaining examples of first-period architecture. The dormer proposed simply does not meet the dimensional requirements of our zoning laws, incidentally, which exist for the common good of our community. I could leave it at that. But the tail of the tape, really, or the tape measure, is enough to make a decision. But regarding the more or less detrimental question, in my view, while any individual applicant is entitled to have their appeal heard fairly, the other 15 or 20,000 citizens of Newburyport are entitled to have their zoning ordinance enforced and applied with both heart and mind. I certainly appreciate the need of the applicant to comply with the building codes, but there's also a need to comply with the zoning code. So to be crystal clear, in my view, the proposed dormer is a detriment not only to the neighborhood, but to the structure, the historic structure, and to the city. I will say with some resignation that the dormer as proposed would really be no more of a wart-like incongruity than the dormer that can be done by right. But I urge the board to deny this application, and let's put an end to the endless continuations that tax everyone's patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon. Would anyone else like to be heard?
Next person we have is Stephanie Nikitich.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. I agree with both Ms. Pecknick and Mr. Bacon with all of their comments. I think that it is a little late to start introducing building code arguments here. And, you know, I can say I note that in this bathroom, there is both a shower and a clawfoot tub, which, while I understand that's desirable, I don't understand why the bathroom would need both. And I will say this is the second incremental reduction of a dormer, which is still too large. And the multiple continuances with inch by inch plan changes is how the public is worn out and shut down. I will probably be your last public commenter. At the last two hearings, there were 9 residents opposed to a dormer larger than what is allowed by right, including a letter from the owner of the other side of this deeded half house. I was one of those in opposition both evenings, and I still am. And I ask that you deny this special permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nikitich. Do we have anyone else that wishes to be heard?
I'm not seeing any takers, Chair.
Seeing no takers. Ms. Nikitich was prophetic. We will close public comment and move to questions from the board, and we'll start, we'll go out of order. We'll start with Mr. Swanton.
Oh, I wasn't ready for that.
I know, curveball.
I'm glad the building code comment already came up, because I too was concerned that we were using modern building standards, building code standards to apply to this building when documented historic structures are exempt from most of those, as has already been pointed out, so I won't belabor that. My big concern with this is, you know, I know the applicant, I know you're concerned that we treat you fairly, but I've looked for I've been on for 2 years now. I've never had a building on a street, close to a street, that's come in and asked for an oversized dormer. And it's not because this is probably the oldest house in town. It's nobody's done it. I went back and found one for 14 to 16 Purchase Street, a house that's recently got finished up and was sold. They had to start like the Historic Commission, and they wanted to put a dormer on the front. Their house was set back 10 feet from the road. And a bunch of, one of the abutters stood up and said, don't do it. And they backed off and didn't do it. And so when it got to us, there was no dormer on the front. So I'm trying to look for a precedent. I can't find one. So it's not like we're singling you out. I don't want to make an exception for the oldest house in town and have you do something that nobody else can do. So I just don't, and I'm also tired. I mean, to me, the first application was on, please throw out the zoning. We shouldn't have to comply to anything. And then we've been through, this is now the 4th dormer we've looked at. So it's just going on and on. I mean, I was going to bring up the building code, but it's already been brought up. I mean, why should, I guess my question, dear applicant, is why should you be the first house that I've being asked to vote yes on an oversized dormer on the street side of a building? Why should you be the first one? That's my question.
Am I unmuted?
Yep, you're unmuted.
Okay. Well, that's a very good question. I was not aware that I was the very first. I know that 265 Water Street did have a dormer on the 2nd floor and on the 3rd floor. and they've been doing some recent renovations. I'm not sure if you mean if it's approval of this project since the new guidelines. I was trying to demonstrate with the roof square footage that the guidelines in place for a by right dormer, which are new, I'm really not that far off from those guidelines. Only 8% is a very, very small measurement in total. I actually was not aware that this project did not require to comply with new building code. And I'm confused by that because when I redid the kitchen, I had to have all of the electrical up to code for spacing and location. And when I did the plumbing, all the plumbing had to be up to code. So I'm actually, I'm confused about that because doing the kitchen and putting in the island and the lighting, that all had to be up to code.
I think that's a good point. I don't know, Andy or somebody, I think perhaps electrical and plumbing are a little different than spacing of some of the room sizes. Are you or Jennifer or somebody, I don't know if any, I guess. Jennifer.
Yeah, Jennifer's not with us tonight. I'm not the expert on the building code. I do suspect that there's probably some more specificity for the utilities end of it. But again, I'd have to defer to the building commissioner and KP Law as to the extent to which the exceptions from the building code would provide some flexibility here. So I'd have to defer to Greg Earls or Dennis Burrell in the building office on that.
Okay, and the building code we did bring up in the last two meetings, but it was more referenced. It wasn't actually, there were no drawings. And at this point I thought, well, maybe you didn't understand, what I was trying to accomplish with satisfying everyone at the same time. And that's why I specifically asked the engineer, the structural engineer, to make drawings to actually show, specifically what I was talking about. And then I took pictures of the text for R305 and R307 to just show what was in code, because I believe the code has to do with safety, exiting the shower, wet floors. I believe that that's why they have a clearance around the shower. So I'm trying to satisfy everything at the same time with just getting just over 140 square feet or just under 140 square feet of really living space on the second floor.
Yeah, I mean, if I could reply, the building code for me is not the biggest issue here. And it's however that works out. I mean, from my perspective, somebody already mentioned that you could reconfigure your bathroom like a lot of folks have a tub with a shower, or you could change the other two rooms back there, the closet or the office. I mean, I know they're small, but in an old house, many of us don't have closets. They're a lot smaller in some of our rooms. But to me, that's not the issue. The big issue is, do I want this to be the first one I vote on, where somebody's got a dormer on the street side, and this one's only 1.5 feet off the side, 1.5 feet off one of the busier streets in town. And that to me is my big issue. And it's if you've been sitting through tonight's meeting, the last two discussions, the fact that they were historic buildings was very important in the discussion. You have what I think is probably the oldest house in town. A lot of people have documented as such. And it's in that way, it's even more historic. So it would be a true irony to me to support an oversized dormer 1.5 feet off of one of the busier streets in town on the oldest house in town. So I'm sorry, I just don't have any more questions. Thank you very much.
Could I respond?
Yes, go right ahead.
So because of the historic references being brought up is part of the reason that I believe that because of the age of this home, that this project is actually being handled differently from other special permit requests, and is, almost indirectly a form of discrimination, that because it's the oldest or one of the oldest, that people are afraid to kind of just go with ZBA requirements or homeowners' rights. And that's a really tough line. And
Yeah, I can understand that, but my reality is I've been here 2 years now and I've never seen an oversized dormer on a street side of a building. So it's not like you're being discriminated against. This is the first one I've seen. So anyway, I'm not trying to discriminate you because the building's old. I don't want to make you the exception, despite, it would be ironic to do it on the oldest house in town because I've never done it anywhere else.
And actually, the bathroom dimensions and the layout were actually limited by the beams from the roof peak that go down to the first floor and the placement to run the pipes. So there's not really a lot of potential reorganizing because I'm trying to work with what's there. You don't see the actual beams. These are walls. We're not showing, if I had a 3D, I could show you there's 2 sets of beams that come down from the original structure versus the salt box L that was added in 1725. So I had to kind of like work around those, and then just other beams that are in the wall and then are behind the shower. That there's actually a cross beam. If you look at the wall between the new closet and the new bathroom, in the drawing, it looks like it's vertical. In that wall, just outside of that wall is a beam coming from the peak to the first floor. So I had to kind of like work around that. The clawfoot tub is no longer a potential because I actually need storage and for linens and towels and blankets and winter things. And so that's not even a possibility anymore. So, I mean, my actual like living space, in a walking space, is really between the shower and the vanity. It's about 16 square feet.
If I could just respond, I mean, generally, we don't spend a lot of time on interiors. We're charged with looking at,
Mr. Swan, you cut out in the middle of your statement. I don't know.
It's, to me, I'm looking at the massing, and you have the person you share your house with is not coming here supporting this. He's against this. So I don't want to just go back and forth with you. I don't have any more questions, and I'd like to yield to the next person.
All right, thank you. I think we should do that as well. Mr. Chagnon. Do you have any
Chair, I
questions?
don't really have any questions. I think I understood the intent of the applicant the last 2 or 3 times, and I understand what they're trying to do. So I don't have any other questions.
All right. Mr. Bennett?
I have no questions. Over the course of the 2 or 3 hearings we've had, we've really plumbed these issues in great detail and heard from the public. So I think I have adequate information to sort through.
Okay, fair enough. Rounding the horn, Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I have no questions either.
Okay. So then it leaves me with questions. I just have one question I wanted to give the opportunity. I know we brought up, colleagues brought up the fact that you, Ms. Bramposi, you had, there were letters against that. We had comments against tonight. Can you refresh the board's memory on letters of support you may have had?
Oh, I would say most of, I think I submitted 10 to 14 letters of support. I actually could have gotten more. I just wasn't sure it was necessary. Number 1 Neptune, 5 Neptune, 7, 12, number Water Street, Jean and John Spellman, and I can't remember if they're 202. Betsy Woodman, which is, I believe she's 198 Water Street, 176 Water Street, Purchase Street, and numerous people that walk by that just verbally say that they hope that the ZBA will vote with me. The neighbor, my next door neighbor at 2.5 is actually not a year-round neighbor. He does not, he and his sister, their families do not live here. They come for weekends or they vacation for a week at a time. So they're concerned with the view from their deck when they are here. The neighbor that has the biggest impact from this project is the Spellmans, and they're, I believe, 202 Water Street. So my backyard and the back of the house looks right to the side of their house. So they would have the bigger, more consistent impact, and they support the project. Jim Wall, number 6 Neptune. So there's numerous. I just didn't, I submitted what I submitted, but I could have submitted another 20 letters. I'm trying to follow all of the procedures to ask all the right questions and submit paperwork and follow the procedure as is placed. And I could have gotten more if I felt that was needed.
Understood. That's the only question I had. So with that, we're going to close that section and move on to deliberations, and no more curveballs. We're just going to go right in order again. So Mr. Delisle can kick it off.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. So we've been almost here before a number of times, and here we are finally. So I think where we are is we have the proposed dormer as it is proposed tonight will take up 74% of the roof. Andy, could you put up slide 3? Thank you. So I think what we're looking at tonight is the drawing for 727 ZBA. That is 75% or 74% of roof coverage. I think that as we look at this through the lens of the special permit for nonconformities, we have to be satisfied that there are no new nonconformities, and that seems to be the case here, and that the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. So in looking at that, we, the zoning board, can consider factors such as the size, scale, massing, volume, and location of the proposed alteration in this case. And we can compare them to the existing structure and lot or other structures in the neighborhood. So when we compare this to what is there now, we have no dormer. So I think going from 0 to 74 is a problem with regard to the size, scale, and massing and volume. And then when I consider the location, this being right on Water Street, I think we're going to be 2 feet from the sideline and then 2 feet off the street. So this dormer will be 4 feet off the public way. It's a highly traffic thoroughfare. I think it's just too close. And for those reasons, I can't support this this application for a special permit for nonconformities. And that is all I have to add.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton?
I think Mr. Delisle said it really well, and I agree with him. I can't support it, and given the late hour, I really don't want to add anything else. I think I've said enough.
Excellent. Move on to Mr. Chagnon.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to fall back to previous meetings and the discussions we had, and I'm looking through this through the lens of what the applicant can have by right, and I think the difference between what the applicant can have by right, which is a 3.5 foot inset on both sides, to what she's proposing, which is 2, is so minor that I can support the application. Since our ordinances allow a dormer of substantial size for this house, I don't have a problem with what she's proposing. So I can support the application as presented.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Shagnon on this. I would adopt his rationale. This is not a situation where dormers are not permitted. They are permitted, excuse me. And given the difference here of 99 square feet to 357 square feet, a total of 23 feet or so square feet. I can support this. And I believe that the criteria for a special permit would be met in that circumstance.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. And it comes down to me here. So with the board split right now, it's 2 noes, 2 yays. There's a chance that this might not move forward here. So we always like to ask for a continuance. I really don't want to do that right now. I'm going to do my deliberation on this as well. And then before we move to a formal vote, we'll maybe throw out a thought here. I tend to be more in the, and I think I've been this way from the beginning with Mr. Chagnon and Mr. Bennett, that by right, a dormer can be built. So the applicant has gone through the process of the demolition delay. There was not a white knight. She wishes to put a dormer in as I guess, I'm gonna say it abhorrent, but the people that are in charge of the historical nature and protecting, and as we all should be as a board, but are really in charge of looking at these first generation homes and doing everything possible to protect them, as we should. Unfortunately, there is a by right dormer that can be built regardless. And like my colleagues, I don't see a big difference between the proposed and the by right. So, I tend to lean more towards the fact that we often have with these things, we look at metrics that we use to guide, size and massing and scale and what's allowed and to be more detrimental. And oftentimes it's percentages, and on Plum Island, it's the FAR, and then it's, lot coverage and for variances. And here for dormers, it's not a percentage of a roof. It's a hard number, which a hard number 3.5 feet in from either side seems to put more of a restriction on a smaller home than it would a larger home. So for those reasons, I don't see it being more detrimental, because the dormer, whether it's by right or the ones that proposed, it's not going to make a difference. I don't think so. I tend to lean towards the support of it, but that doesn't get us to an approval. So before we move to a formal vote, I hate to do this one more time, but I believe I can speak for the board. I think in deliberations here, I think the applicant asked earlier, if this isn't going to pass, what would? I think it's been pretty clear what would get some members begrudgingly over the line, and it's I would say it'd have to be a compliant dormer. But that's not a guarantee, but just from reading the tea leaves, since one is allowable by right, if one came in with the dimensions that are allowed by right, I think it would be hard pressed to say no to, but I can do a straw poll and see if that would make a difference.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
And maybe this is for discussion based on what you were just offering to the board. Would 2.5 feet on the, instead of 2 feet, 2.5 feet, that would butt right up to the building code, would that be acceptable?
I'm not sure that negotiating, what would work with the board is the proper way to go this. I don't know if that's if that's something the board would be comfortable with. I know what you can do by right. I know what you've tried to propose. I think the board's been pretty clear. I mean, to keep creeping to get to where I think we need to get to, I'm not sure is the way to go, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay, so I do have a separate question then. If
Sure.
I were to apply to the building department to build a by right dormer, they will not require me to comply with building code in the bathroom.
That I cannot say. Of course, you'd have to follow building codes. And again, it would be safety codes first from what I understand, but I am not prepared to give you the definitive answer. Then I don't think Andy would be able to help me out on that either, but
Yeah, so as I indicated before, Jennifer isn't here. She doesn't deal with the building code directly
Right.
either. It would really be Greg Earls or Dennis Brown, the billing office you'd want to speak to. The comment was made earlier this evening. KP Law has given opinion to the planning office and the building department as to the relief or exemptions for historic structures under the building code. That much is clear. What isn't, I think, clear, and we'd have to defer to the building office for further review on, is the extent to which that flexibility applies here for, say, the bathroom space as it's been discussed tonight. We would have to inquire with them about that particular detail, I think.
having gone through so many iterations, and to ask you again, if it's a by right dormer that's proposed, does it end up in front of us anyway?
It may be perceived as an extension of a nonconformity, so that is a separate. We've had some discussion internally, and I prefer not to use the term by right dormer.
Okay.
Just because I think it might suggest latitude under the ordinance for something as of right, where the ordinance doesn't explicitly say that that's allowed everywhere without other relief or review.
Point taken. So yeah, and if I speak out of turn, it's because I'm not an attorney, and sometimes I say things I probably shouldn't say. So Ms. Pampos, I the only guidance I can give you is what you've had in the straw poll, which has been pretty clearly you don't have enough to do this as proposed, and I think there's been some good feedback on the only thing that might work, but that can't be guaranteed.
So I guess, since I'm not a lawyer, I should ask for a continuance so I can contact the building department and ask if they would indeed confirm the comments that were made during the session that I could build the by right dormer without complying with state building code.
I think if you had questions like that, that would probably make some sense. So you're asking for a continuance.
I believe I need to, because I was strictly under the impression that all new construction once you touch one wall, one outlet, one piece of plumbing, that you had to bring everything up to code for that section, for that room, for that floor. And so there are comments that were made tonight that said that historic homes are exempt. And so not that a by right dormer would, to me, be safe in the bathroom. If that exempts me, then it removes that worry of complying with both departments. So I do think at this point I should ask for a continuance and discuss and meet with the building department.
I think that makes sense, and I think you have some good legal questions. I also want to reiterate that my use of by right was probably ill-advised. I'm not sure anything in this case can be called by right, as was pointed out by by Andy Port. So don't run off the fact that I might have misused the term there and run, but I think you do. I think it would make some sense for you to check into all the issues that were brought up tonight.
Okay.
This is Andy. If I could offer as well, thinking about the applicant may need additional time to revise plans if based on the conversation with the building department. I don't know if that gives any indication as to when the continuation should be moved to, whether that be potentially the September 14th date or the 28th. I don't know. It seems unlikely that you'd be able to get those answers and get revised plans back in a week for the the next meeting packet, I guess. So I don't know if that's, I just wanted to point that out for the applicant and the board to decide what continuation date makes sense.
I was thinking end of September.
Okay,
Is
so it would be the 28th. 28th.
Okay.
Okay,
A month should be enough time to get answers.
I would agree. So the applicant is asked to continue this to the meeting of September 28th in order to get some legal issues cleared up. And what says the board?
Also move.
I'll second that, Stephen Delisle.
Okay, we have a motion to continue this matter to the September 28th meeting, made by Mr. Bennett, second by Mr. Delisle. We do the vote now. Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well, only the affirmative, and although that we don't need that many votes, but yes, the application is continued to the September 28th meeting, and we will reconvene and take another bite of the apple. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you so
Bampos.
much.
You bet. I now get to hand the gavel back to the chair, who, Mr. Ciampetti, who must be enjoying this from the sidelines.
He may have left us, Mr. Moore.
Do you think he did?
That's my bet.
Yeah, I do not see him on the our attendees list. So
He's asleep.
Yeah,
The
looking at the
Irish
poll.
The Irish goodbye. Okay, great. So that concludes the public hearing portion of tonight's agenda. We will now move on to the business meeting, which starts with the approval of the minutes of 7/27/21. I assume everyone's taken a peek. Does anyone have any additions, corrections, comments, or are we moving to approve?
I move we approve the minutes of 7/27/21.
Second that, Stephen Delisle.
We have moved to approve the minutes by Mr. Swanton, second by Mr. Delisle. We do the vote. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Moore? Yes. The the minutes of the meeting, 7/27, are approved. And the last thing in our business meeting would be if Andy Port wants to critique my performance on the last application.
no, not at all, Chair. No, thank you. I won't keep you any longer.
Thank you very much.
We've been here, yeah. Just a quick note that we are efforting to try to get confirmation of in-person / hybrid meeting set up again. We've run into a little bit of a snag trying to get back into the council chambers as we were doing before the pandemic to reserve that room with any reliability. That seems to be for some reason an issue now. So we are looking to the senior center. However, they have, because they've already booked some of the nights that we normally meet, we're trying to work out whether they can relocate some of those events. So we're working on that. We'll circle back with you, but our plan is to try to make sure that both the planning board and the ZBA can meet in person or remote, the so-called hybrid setup using the senior center moving forward, just so that we have a room that we can rely upon for meetings. So if you have any questions on that, let me know, but otherwise we'll circle back once we have confirmation of both location and technological issues being resolved. We'll be doing it similar to what the council's been doing. But again, we just ran into a bit of a snag trying to get into the council chambers as we had done previously.
Just, can I ask a quick question, which is who took our night in the council chambers?
As far as the council chambers, it's actually not a specific reservation. What we were told essentially was that I had reached out because we had previously had some double bookings, and knowing how awkward things have been with the pandemic going back and forth, the remote and so forth, I had asked to make sure confirmation that when we booked the council chambers that we would not have a double booking, because I didn't want to have folks show up here and then find out they had to go to a different building or a different room, running into violations of the open meeting law. And the response I essentially got was that we wouldn't necessarily be able to reserve that room for us because counselors have the council itself has jurisdiction over the council chamber, and therefore they maybe still make it free to themselves for committee meetings that they may need to schedule on the fly. The problem we have with that on our end is that we actually advertise hearings in advance as to which building they're going to be in, and given that the auditorium wasn't set up for the technological end of this, It also has heating issues in the summer and, cold issues in the winter. There's some debate about the auditorium not being a great location for it. So, and that wasn't really contemplated when they were buying equipment for the hybrid setup. So at any rate, it's actually more a function of the council wanting to reserve the right to schedule meetings as needed, because they have lots of subcommittees they meet on a regular basis as well. And that is their room to sort of work with. So even though that has always been the practice at the time that I've been here, that we've used that room, because we couldn't use that with any reliance on the dates that we're advertising, and not wanting to run into any issues, certainly in trying to set up a hybrid meeting, which adds more work for us and complications to make it work smoothly than a normal meeting or a Zoom meeting, either way. We didn't want to run into any snags. So I spoke with the mayor, we talked about using the senior center, and now we are trying to make sure that that space does not have any conflicts. And we've just run into a few where some folks have been told they could use those rooms and those spaces on nights where this board or the planning board would typically meet. So it's just a little bit awkward because we're trying to coordinate and not ruffle other feathers and not bump anybody else from any rooms, but at the same time, have the ability to come back in person with a reliable location.
Good times. Well, hopefully we can get that squared away. So that concludes the evening's festivities. As much as I'd like to hang, do we have a motion
So
to adjourn?
I move we adjourn. Ken Swanton.
Anyone second, or who seconded it?
Panic.
All right. Swanton moves to adjourn. Bennett seconds it. We do it by we'll do it by voice. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? The ayes have it. Meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Good night.
See you guys.
Bye.
Good night.